upset a board that much.
Oh. Although unfortunately, I don't take the kind that's dangerous.
Good evening. Welcome to our April meeting of the City Commission. This is the regular April City Commission meeting, which was delayed and rescheduled until today, April 29th. It is the same agenda, though, that is published on our website by telephone or through Zoom, and we are complying with the governor's executive telephone or through Zoom. And for those on the telephone, I just want to let you know that on each agenda item, I will call on you and give you plenty of opportunity to ask questions or comment. And so I will give you plenty of opportunity before we move on to the next item or take any action. We will also allow live public comment one at a time to come into the commission room, and we also allowed an opportunity for the public to provide comment via email prior to this meeting. So this meeting will be conducted with all possible attention to public safety, and we are still encouraging public comment. Again, thank you for joining us tonight and for your, it's so important for your attendance and for public comment by any means. So we are going to get started with the Pledge of Allegiance, and Commissioner Samora, will you lead us?
I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. So we will take the roll call. If our city clerk will take the roll call, please.
Mayor England,
Here.
Vice Mayor Kostka,
Here.
Commissioner George,
Here.
Commissioner Samora,
Here.
Commissioner Romrell.
Here. Here.
All right. The next thing we will do is look at the minutes and the approval of the minutes from the special commission meeting on March 2nd and our regular commission meeting on March 2nd and the emergency commission meeting on March 20th. Can I get a motion to approve the minutes? But first, is there any changes? Commissioner George, any changes?
No, thank you, Mayor, no.
Commissioner Romrell, any changes?
No, Mayor.
Okay, so then we'll have a motion to approve the minutes,
A motion to approve the minutes as written.
and I'll second. And we need a roll call vote to approve the minutes.
Mayor England,
Approved.
Vice Mayor Kostka,
Yes.
Commissioner George,
Yes.
Commissioner Samora,
Yes.
Commissioner Romrell.
Yes.
All right, thank you. So now it's my honor to introduce, and we have a special guest tonight, our Congressman John Rutherford from the Florida 4th District, the U.S. House of Representatives. We are very honored to have you come speak to us tonight. And this is for the public. He is attending virtually by telephone and Zoom. So are you, Mr. Rutherford, Congressman Rutherford, can you hear me, and are you ready?
Hello, I can hear you now. Yes, we're ready.
All right, great.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate this opportunity to tell you a little bit about what's going on as far as the federal response to the pandemic and CARES Act 1 and CARES Act 2. And I'll start by talking a little bit about the original CARES Act first, and then some of the changes that we made going into CARES Act 2. One thing I will tell you is 74% of the loans, and that was over 1.6 million loans that went out, 74% of those were for $150,000 or less. So that tells me that money is in fact going to going to small business. But of course, as we've all heard, there are those exceptions out there, those outliers like Shake Shack and Ruth Chris and Harvard, LA Lakers now, and there will be more, I'm sure. And I want to explain to folks how that can happen. The qualifying concern was placed on the borrower, not the lender. So what that means is we wanted this money to get out as quickly as possible, so that it could get to individuals who were paying mortgages and had other bills coming in. We wanted to get this money out to them as quickly as possible. So we didn't want the lenders spending a lot of time going over these applications, because we also put $25 million into the CARES Act for the Inspector General's office to hire forensic auditors to look at a lot of these loans to make sure that they're going to where we want them, where they were supposed to go. And here's the thing. I want to emphasize that these are loans. So even these companies that have not agreed to send their money back, it will come back eventually if they don't qualify or they don't spend it properly. It'll come back because those are loans that they have to pay back. Now, the way a small business can actually have this loan turned into a grant that they do not have to pay back is 75% of the loan that they receive has to be used for payroll for their employees, and 25% could be up to 25% could be used for rent, utilities, business expenses like that. But if they don't meet that requirement, and then that loan remains a loan and they have to pay it back. If they meet all the guidelines, they qualify, and that could be determined later. But if they qualify, they spend 75%, then they will on salaries. Then they will have that loan turned into a grant, and it will be forgiven. So let me talk about some of the changes that we made in the CARES Act 2.0, which, as you know, was a total of $484 billion. And in that, I will tell you there was around $310 billion for the Paycheck Protection Plan. So that's about $670 billion that we have put into the PPP. EIDL, the SBA loan called EIDL, it stands for Economic Injury Disaster Loan. That's been plussed up to $20 billion. That's another $10 billion in there. Their disaster loan program, straight up disaster loan program, we put $50 billion in there. We put some additional money in there for the SBA because, as many of you know, if you've tried to get these loans, when we first started, the system crashed. The SBA system, the E-Trans system, crashed because of the demand. They got that fixed. They got it up and running. Then the money ran out, and people were told, continue to make your applications because there's going to be a second tranche of money. So when the system came back up, I think it was Monday at 10 o'clock, it immediately crashed at like 10:50 because there were even more loans than they ever had in one day for CARES Act 1.0. So we put extra money in for employees and IT expenses to meet that need. I can also tell you one of the things that we tried to do to really make sure that this money was going to get to the smaller businesses was we took $60 billion of that 310 and set it aside for small community financial institutions like credit unions, state and federal and minority depository institutions, even certified development companies. They will be the lenders for this $60 billion. And the way that's going to be parsed out is $30 billion will go to lenders that have $10 billion or less in assets, and $30 billion will go to those institutions that have $10 billion to $50 billion in assets. And so that's going to help ensure that money really gets down to the small businesses, and hopefully we won't have the situation we had before. Also, I think it's important from an agricultural standpoint. Ag is the second largest revenue stream or revenue industry in Florida, behind tourism. And we have $50 billion directed to Secretary Perdue for direct commodity purchases and other programs being run out of USDA. And we also increased the CCC from $30 to $50 billion, so that's a $20 billion increase for the Commodity Credit Corporation. And also there's money there for rural hospitals, $75 billion. $825 million of that actually is directed straight to and will be direct payments to community health centers, which I think is going to be very important. Also, $25 billion to the states for testing. Also, FDA is getting $22 million for testing, and $11 billion of that is going to go to state and locals for testing and tracing, which that's clearly going to be very important as we move toward opening business back up in Florida. And with that, I will throw it open for questions. Oh, I'll say this too. Of the money that was set aside in CARES Act 1.0 for the cities, I think it was $150 billion. Florida is going to receive somewhere around $8 billion of that. Some of that, as you've seen, is dedicated to cities 500,000 and more in population. I think $3 billion of that was set aside for that. The other $5 billion or so is going to be dispersed by the state, and how they do that is really up to them. And so I'm encouraging the less than 500,000 cities to contact the governor's office for looking at how they intend to distribute those funds. And with that, I will throw it open for questions. And I will say this also, Mr. Royal, that I'm on a letter to FEMA. One of the things that I'm asking them to do, actually it's not just me, there's several of us I've got on the letter, but we're asking FEMA to waive the 25% match on disaster loans. I mean, just in this circumstance, it doesn't make sense. We're giving money to cities to pull 25% of it back for a disaster loan. So hopefully that match will go away. But we have not heard back on that yet. But I want to throw that out there also. So with that, I can answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you so much, Congressman. If you can stay with us for a few more minutes, I will ask the commissioners if they have any questions, starting with the commissioners here. Vice Mayor.
No, I have no questions. Thank you so much for your time and giving us the information.
Commissioner Samora.
No, Congressman, thank you. I was actually on your call with the chamber this afternoon, so appreciate all the information. You're doing a great job.
Commissioner George.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you.
Commissioner George, any questions?
No questions. Just like to thank our congressman for all of his hard work and protecting the people of our great state.
And Commissioner
Thank you very
Romrell.
much.
No questions. Congressman, again, thank you for your hard work, and look forward to seeing you soon. And take care and be safe.
Thank you.
Congressman, this is Margaret England. I just wanted to thank you again, but also emphasize small cities, our needs. We have a very tight budget, and so disruptions, we're still suffering from hurricanes and getting our budget in place. Our reserves are diminished. And so the need for the money to come down to cities less than 500,000 is so great, because 12% of our revenue comes from the state, and we anticipate those revenues being decreased. There are another 10% comes from other types of utility taxes, and that's going to be, because of the closures, things will be reduced. So while the biggest portion, or 36% or 37% of our budget comes from ad valorem taxes, the state of Florida, we don't have income taxes. The bed tax goes to the county. So we are really going to be looking for some help and some guidelines and regulations for the states to distribute the money down to the cities, the smaller cities.
I agree with you, and we've already sent about $700 billion out to the states. Now it went through a lot of different programs that it was dedicated to, but I do think one of the things that we need to do, because we're hearing this from some of the states, is that look, we're going to leave money on the table because the guardrails that were put on were too tight, and they can't spend it in the way that we are asking them to spend it. And so, two things. Number one, we are going to look at opening up those guardrails so that the states will have greater flexibility on how they can utilize those resources. And then the second thing is that I want you to know, I do believe that we're going to have to look at another tranche of relief for state and local, but I think it needs to be focused on COVID-19 impact. In other words, look at your funding streams, the lack of funding from the state, as you mentioned earlier. But what I don't want to do is see us bailing out cities that were already in financial trouble. Baltimore, Detroit, cities like that. Certainly, we need to take care of their COVID-19 impact, but I don't want them to use this as a way to mitigate poor leadership in the past. So we will. I am supportive of looking to get more relief for state and local.
Good advice, and we certainly will be taking that to keep our accounting procedures and all our evidence in place. That's great advice. Thank you so much.
No, thank you, and y'all have always done a great job at that, which is why we've been pretty successful with our hurricane relief, even though it's a long time coming always. But no, thank you all. You've been great to work with.
Thank you, sir. You have a good evening. Again, thank you for joining us, and we will certainly pay close attention to other agenda items and things that your webinars that you are presenting. Thank you for doing that.
Okay, thank you. Y'all take care. Be safe.
All right. Max, are there any additions or deletions to the agenda tonight?
No, ma'am, none for me.
Do we have one addition that is in here about discussion of communication media technology?
Yes, that's in the front of the agenda books if you want to.
So we'll go to that next?
Well, that or you want to go to your interviews. Are we ready for, we're missing one of our interviewees, so you could go to Mr. Anthony Johns next for that agenda item about the communications.
Okay, is there any changes to the order of topics that's on our agenda?
I have a concern, actually, about just even moving forward with meeting. From what I understand, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but if the agenda was not posted, if the agenda was posted on April, before April 6th, for the April 6th originally scheduled meeting, is one thing. But if the agenda was not posted for tonight's meeting, even though it was the same as the one that was previously posted, then are we in violation of not posting the agenda for the meeting? Because if that's the case, then we shouldn't proceed, because we didn't notify the public of the agenda. Legal?
Thank you, Vice Mayor. Yes, it was posted electronically as the other agendas are posted, so we believe that it was properly noticed and the meeting can proceed.
To explain a little better, our understanding is that it was posted, and that it was posted as the postponed meeting, so that you had to actually go to the link to find the agenda. You had to go to the previous meeting. That should suffice, because anybody that was I was able to do it, I didn't even think about that it was an extra step. But I don't believe that's going to create any conflict, because the agenda was findable and it was posted. And to my knowledge, the only person that's complained to anybody has been two of the commissioners, and I'm glad you guys did, because those are the types of things, they were able to fix it. It's been fixed for a couple of days now, I believe. So I think we're okay. The agenda has been posted. This is a postponement of a previous meeting that agenda never came off. So I think we're okay.
Okay, the last thing that I want to happen is to have our city be in any kind of trouble because we didn't do things correctly, especially during these times when everything is so unusual, right? And and especially because we have an item on here that requires, we're going to be talking about taxing our citizens. So I just want to make sure that we're doing things all properly.
Commissioner George, do you have anything you want to add to this question?
I'm not sure if this is coming up from the email I sent. I presume, I had a conversation with our attorney previous to my email, which led me to believe that we had already sufficiently complied. So I did not expect that my email would, raise any new legal question. However, I'm glad Vice Mayor brought it up so we can have that clarified. With that statement from the attorney that it's all good, I have no problem proceeding. I just really think that those types of, oversights and details, Max, we need you to be all eyes on deck here to make sure that things are easy to read for the public. That's all. I just want to make sure those kinds of things don't happen because, right now all the citizens are feeling frustrated, and so we need to make it as easy as possible. With that said, thank you, Mayor. I don't have any questions. My concern is resolved.
Commissioner Romrell, any questions from you?
Mayor, thank you, and thank you, Vice Mayor, for bringing that up. I think legal answered the question that Commissioner George had, and I feel confident enough in our legal team, and I'm okay to proceed forward.
Commissioner Samora?
None here.
Okay, we shall proceed. So we will proceed to the IT report by Mr. Johns. And this is about our conducting meetings electronically using CMT, Communication Media Technology. I just found out what the CMT means.
Yeah, I apologize. I'll ask Russell to answer that one for you the other day, but I did see your email. And yeah, we're technically using CMT currently with the 2 commissioners joining us remotely. So we're already there. I think you guys have all seen a memo from me? Yes, good. No?
I'm so sorry. I did not, and I don't have it. Apologies.
I can give you the really short summary. We'll do whatever you want to do. That's yeah.
Move forward.
We're good, we can go?
Yeah, just give us a summary about what this is all about and some of the discussions we've had.
I think after speaking with you, we've kind of gone to, I think we're all leaning towards maybe allowing phone comments at some point in time. If we continue with meetings with the public kind of limited and social distancing still in place. And I think what you had in front of you with the memo was some of our concerns with doing those things. Some of them, we're gonna feel some pains with implementing some of the systems just because we don't have some of the equipment or some of the software services that like the county has. And I can explain to you why. It's not really complicated, not really long. We've never needed them before. The call queuing, we don't take enough calls to where we need to keep our calls in order and actually pick them up as they come in. We're not a utility department. We're not we're not like a Fortune 500 company here getting 50 calls an hour. It's not happening. We get calls regularly, but we deal with them. We move to the next call. We're not queuing calls here. And conferencing, we do conferencing with the city, but usually we put the burden of actually providing the conferencing software or the conferencing hardware on the host. So we don't normally have to have those things.
Things change, don't they?
Things do change, yeah. We're unfortunately, we don't have those. What we have looked at is we do have parking orbits, which is where we can actually place a call, kind of like on hold, but it goes into a temporary space where it just sits there. We do believe that we can actually take public comment by phone if we utilize those park orbits, and we can see them, we can bring them into the room, we can play them over our sound system. Likely, unfortunately, it'll probably be through a microphone, but we can do that. We do anticipate we're going to have some growing pains with that. We kind of expect to need an additional staff member to answer those calls outside of the room, otherwise they're going to be kind of disturbing for you conducting a business meeting while the phone's just ringing. We also kind of anticipate that we're going to have a little bit of trouble with if someone calls in for agenda item 1 and we're taking public comment, we see that being a bit of an issue. And even so much as foul language and things like that, but we've had those discussions before with profanity and things, and we've discussed the city meetings aren't a Disney program. I'm sorry, they're not G-rated. We've had profanity get spewed in a commission meeting before, and we've discussed whether we were going to censor it or not. And we ultimately decided no, and we still have ways to deal with somebody that's being abusive. So they can always be ejected from the meeting, whether it's virtual or not. You have that ability. So we
hang
can
up?
always, yes, yeah. I mean that really is the answer. So we can do that. And I think as far as IT staff's concerned, we'll try whatever you guys want to try, and I think that one would actually work well.
Your memo here of March 29th mentions the ability, and I think we talked about that, the ability to purchase another part of Zoom that would allow us to accept live public comment a little easier and without some of the restrictions on our current telephone system, or was it our current telephone system you were going to look into?
It was our current telephone system, and I apologize, since I've spoken to you last, I've not done that. We just published our RFP and have been answering a bunch of questions with that, but which also resolves some of our remote workplace issues. But
so just for the commissioners, it was, the discussions I've had with staff is about having our meetings, as long as we're under an emergency order, and having virtual meetings, mimic or have as close as possible to the county and the city of St. Augustine, just for consistency. So I'd like your comments on that, and Vice Mayor, I'll start with you.
Sure. So I've attended every county meeting since the emergency order went into effect. And I had a brief conversation with you before the meeting started about our setup in our room, which you referred to the 10 or or less people in a gathering. However, at the county commission meetings, there are more than 10 people in that commission meeting room every single week. So I'm wondering if we can explore the guidelines, if it means groups of 10 which are in close proximity together, or it's social distancing that we have to abide by, or where is the clarification in that? The second thing that I I'm just curious, and I don't even know who to call, because I have attempted to call many offices at the state to find out who could give us permission, but is it feasible to request permission to use the county commission room, which is already set up for all of these things, on a different alternate date than they use the commission room? Now, I know that the statute says that our city meetings have to be held within our city. That's the law. But it also used to be the law that we needed a quorum. So, we are in an emergency situation, and there are leniencies being given. And if we have a room, which is the county commission room, to be able to utilize, if we're given permission to use that during the duration of the crisis, that would be a beautiful thing. Then we wouldn't have to worry about hurrying up and getting additional items that we had to spend money on, which is already kind of critical. So I was hoping that maybe someone could explore that, or even just give direction. I'll make the phone call, I just don't know who to call, and I've had no success in the attempts that I've made to the state so far.
And I can tell you, and I didn't want to interrupt you, I know neither one of those questions are necessarily directly related to me, but
Correct.
Yeah, and I've been told the same thing with the county, was that we weren't able to hold them there. Because as far as IT staff was concerned, we were definitely in favor of that, because it meant we had to make no modifications to our room whatsoever.
Right.
Which fortunately our sound system was done in such a way that we've really made minimal modifications to get this to work. Primarily, we've plugged in one of our hearing assists into this computer, and it brings our remote commissioners right over our sound system, which is fantastic. But we were fortunate to have that. But as far as doing them in the county, I would love to, but it's not my decision. And as far as having people in the room, that's also not my decision. But I think that's definitely appropriate to bring up during this agenda item. I just don't know who would answer that.
Okay.
I think Max is probably the best
I
one.
think we might be able to, staff can explore that along with our attorneys and do a benefit pros and cons on that.
Sure.
And then we can see, as long as the emergency order is in place, that we can see if that benefits our residents to have it at the county.
Sure, and
So-
I don't even have any problem with that being assigned to me. I'm not, when I say that, I know that wasn't directly related to IT staff, I just mean that it's not really an IT question.
I completely
But
understand.
I know that
Sure.
Max can assign it to whoever he wants it to go to, and Russell and I are here. So I'll be here the next 2 days, I'll be here next week, we're here. So we can do that if that's something you guys desire.
Commissioner Samora, any thoughts on this?
Yeah, when does the emergency order expire? Is that tomorrow or May 9th? I'm not sure why we're discussing having remote meetings when the emergency order is going to be expiring. We've got one other meeting set up. This setup seems to be working, so I'm not sure why we're discussing taking our meetings outside the city.
I believe the emergency order expires May 8th. Is that correct for,
It's either May 8th or May 9th would be the latest
yeah,
order that's in
yes.
effect right now.
But it could be extended, and even beyond that, there could be, as we reopen, there could be some more amendments to the 2069, which allows for the CMT meetings. So that's why we're talking about it.
Okay.
It could extend, and there could be concerns about how we do that. Do we, in what way do we conduct the meetings?
Okay.
Commissioner George, any thoughts from you?
To echo what Commissioner Samora said, I think that this seems to be working so far, the way we have it. I haven't heard from staff. I'm curious how many, public requests to participate we got in advance. I think that would help inform the discussion, but at least for now and next Monday, this seems to be working, and any other options to be explored, it's always great to have more information. Thank you.
Commissioner Romrell.
I'm no comment. I'm good.
There was discussion on whether we would try to open up Monday's meeting for live comment by phone, but if the commissioners are happy with the way we're conducting this meeting right now, we will, and I don't see a lot of the public outside or demand for public comment via telephone, but quickly, let me ask you the question. Is there a need to push for public comment by telephone for Monday's meeting? Vice Mayor?
I don't know, but I would like the options of our interior setup explored. Because like I said, at the county commission room, they have more than 10 people in the commission room to hold a meeting. And so I'm not sure where those parameters lie. I'm embarrassed that we ask our public to stand outside during our meeting and only let them in one at a time to give a public comment. And so that may be discouraging the public from even attending. So I just don't, during this time, I just want to be careful about excluding or giving the impression that we're trying to exclude or hide, during this time, is all.
Commissioner Samora?
I think setting up the interior room using guidelines that were just issued, 6-foot spacing and capacity limits, I think we should look at that. I think that'd be great. I think it's a much better option than a call-in. I think we are giving, the phone call-in seems cumbersome. If we're going to entertain that for public comment on every single agenda item, I think it's going to get a little bit tough to manage. And I think if we can provide a space inside as well as outside for those that are comfortable, some may be more comfortable sitting outside.
Okay.
Maybe we look at that.
All right. Commissioner George?
Thank you, Mayor. I would like my question from my last speaking opportunity to be answered by staff. How many requests did we get in advance of tonight's meeting to participate?
This is Max, Commissioner. I'll have to get that information for you. Beverly would have it, but she's not here tonight. She had a medical matter she had to attend to, but I'll get that information for you.
This is Dariana, sitting in for Beverly tonight. I can tell you I've been handling all the calls that are being forwarded, and I have not received any phone calls asking about comment by phone for this meeting or for May 4th yet.
Okay, thank you for that. Then I'd also like to say I think that we have a much smaller room than the county commission. That's obvious, I understand, but I think we have to be careful about protecting everybody's health, and just as long as we're adhering to the recommendations and guidelines, that's great. But also, our citizens have frequently been emailing comments even before these regulations. I think that they do know they have an opportunity to comment. So I wouldn't want to be too rash to, have the room jam-packed. I think it would be safe to be a little more cautious even than the guidelines in some cases. So I'm not going to be there Monday, so I'd say I'd really defer to the three of you. I'll be present electronically again, but at least for the May meeting, I'm not going to weigh in too much on it simply because I'm not going to be the one putting myself at risk. But I would urge all of you and to protect yourselves and staff. So caution is always the best policy for safety.
Thank you, Commissioner George. Commissioner Romrell?
Thank you, Mayor. I'd like to kind of see if there's a way to do a hybrid, because I think the confidence of people coming to meetings may be small initially because they're not in the position to move out and about. And we also have an older population here at the beach as well who like to come to meetings and participate and give point of views. So if there's a way for us to kind of figure out a hybrid, I think Commissioner Kostka, Vice Mayor Kostka is thought process of doing it at the county where there's a little bit more space may be helpful, but if we could figure out how to maybe have phone calls and or people present, more transparency, I think, in this time is more important than it's ever been. So if there's a way to do a hybrid, I'd like to figure out how to figure that out.
Okay, I would ask our attorneys to maybe take all this in, and maybe we could have a discussion with staff Friday, or, Monday's meeting is right around the corner, so I don't know exactly how much we can change by Monday, but maybe a short conversation to see if we can add a few chairs or add a few phone lines, or I don't know, but like I say, our goal is to be as similar to the county and the city of St. Augustine, if we can, within reason, and see what we can do.
We will do that, Mayor. Thank you.
Okay, all righty.
If I may, I apologize.
Yes.
But we have been speaking with you, we've been speaking
Right.
with the attorney. The entire time we've been dealing with this, coming up to this meeting, we've been working on ways to try and get the public to either be able to phone in or participate. We've worked on that. I know you've all seen a complaint that we're trying to make a no comment meeting. We've been working the entire time to make as many avenues for comment as we were able.
I know you have.
Including the small meeting room on the west side of this building, placing sound equipment in there and making it where we can seat people inside there. So that may be an option. Unfortunately, there is a TV in there, but it's an older TV, and we now broadcast full digital signal. So that TV will not receive it. We would have to replace that. We were actually going to climb through the attic, run some new wire, but it would do no good unless we replace the TV. But we can put sound equipment in there, and people can be seated in there the same as they would be outside. And we've discussed that option at staff level. We haven't done it yet, mostly because this meeting was here now, and we said, okay, well, let's find out what the commission wants.
Okay, all
But
right.
there are options we can exercise.
Okay, so we've got some input on adding some more facilities for people to be live in here, and perhaps doing some phone calls. So we will work on that. And, how much would a TV cost, Anthony?
I apologize. They're fairly cheap now for the size that we'd be looking for. Patty will kill me for saying this because she said no more spending, but probably realistically a couple $100 with the mount and everything.
Right, so maybe we will get a contribution.
Okay.
Okay. All right, well, thank you. All right, we'll go on to our next agenda item, which is appointment to the Code Enforcement Board. Max, is that your presentation?
No, Mayor, that is the commissioners, both, first let me preface that, both applicants are connected to us. So you simply can begin the meeting by introducing the first one, that's Mr. Ernesto Torres. Okay, they can't hear us, but they're lined up to speak once you're ready to have them.
Okay, so if you can connect Mr. Torres for us?
I apologize. We've admitted Mr. Torres, but we're waiting on him to connect his audio.
Okay. Mr. Torres, are you on the phone? Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, then we will turn the floor over to you to state your request for reappointment to the Code Enforcement Board.
Sure, thank you, and thanks to the commission for allowing me the opportunity for this. I know that there was a delay for the request based on Mr. Wilson's recommendations, but I am prepared to continue to serve, whether if I'm not elected into the commission. But I've been in the code enforcement now for several years, and I've served my last 2 years as the chairman of the board. And today we had a meeting, and now Mr. Sweeney will be filling that role. I'll be stepping down as the chairman, and but it's been an honor and a privilege to serve, and I'd like to continue to serve if things do not work out for me on my pursuit to fulfill the commission seat.
Thank you so much for being willing to still serve on code enforcement, because code enforcement is very important right now. If we get a complaint about restaurants or some of the businesses, it is code enforcement that goes out there, and so it's important. So I'm going to ask the commissioners to comment or ask any questions they have of you. Vice Mayor.
I have none.
Commissioner Samora.
From what I can tell, the legal question was resolved, so I have no other questions.
Commissioner George.
No other questions at this time. Thank you so much, and thank you for serving.
Commissioner Romrell.
I have no other questions as the legal issue was answered. Thank you.
All right, then I need a motion to reappoint Mr. Torres to the code enforcement, and a second.
I will make a motion to reappoint Mr. Torres to the Code Enforcement Board.
I'll second.
And then we will have a roll call vote.
Vice Mayor Kostka?
Yes.
Commissioner George?
Yes.
Commissioner Samora?
Yes.
Commissioner Romrell?
Yes.
Mayor England?
Yes.
Motion passes unanimously.
All right, thank you, Mr. Torres. Thank you so much. We need your help.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you very much, everybody.
All right, now we will go to public hearings, conditional.
Proclamations.
No, Mayor, we have another candidate for the code board, Mr. Wilson,
Oh,
for an alternate's position. And we're trying to connect him now.
oh, okay.
Mayor?
Yes.
It's Commissioner Romrell. I'm having a hard time hearing Max. He sounds very muffled on my end, and so I'm having a hard time understanding him.
I am as well. He seems to be the only person in the room who, is really coming across distorted.
Yeah, I'm holding the microphone right in front of me. Can you hear things better now? Now? How about this
It
one?
sounded the further away you were, the better it was.
Yes,
Further
I
away.
agree.
Okay, we'll try further away. Thank you.
There, Mr. Wilson, okay.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes, Mr. Wilson, is that you?
It is, I apologize. Self-inflicted user difficulty.
All right, we will turn the floor over to you to state your reasons for being wanting to be appointed to our Code Enforcement Board, and thank you so much for volunteering.
Oh, I appreciate it. I was given the opportunity, and Mr. Law asked me if I'd like to join the board, and I definitely have an interest for it. I've lived in St. Augustine now for about 5 or 6 years. We built a house in Anastasia Dune. Construction's in my blood, so I'm a general contractor. My father-in-law's an architect. My brother-in-law's a landscape architect. So, every day, that's all I live and breathe. So St. Augustine is a place that my 5 kids and I, we spend every second, going to the beach, playing sports around here. So, trying to maintain the beauty and the appeal that I think brings a lot of people to our city is something that I'm definitely intrigued by and would love to have an opportunity to hopefully use my expertise to help out.
Well, thank you. The only thing I would like to ask you is, I hear your children, and you mentioned children. Code enforcement is going to be the agency that may have to go out to the public or to our businesses or to short-term rentals and enforce some of the rules on restrictions due to the COVID-19 regulations and restrictions. And I just want to make sure you're aware of that, and that...
Excuse me, Mayor. On Mr. Wilson's application, he has actually checked the box where it says he's applying for an alternate for the Comprehensive Planning and Zoning Board, not the Code Enforcement Board, but that's what's listed as the agenda.
I can
we have
explain that.
clarification?
Yes, ma'am. If you recall, a couple months ago, we were looking for, I believe, 2 positions for the Planning and Zoning Board. He was one of the applicants, but he had the days messed up, so he didn't attend the meeting here that Monday. At that point, we had 3 applicants, 2 showed up, so we appointed the 2, but he volunteered to serve on the Code Enforcement Board.
Thank you.
So this application actually predates his application to here. And Madam Mayor, if I may, the Code Board doesn't actually go to the jobs.
Okay.
They have no jurisdiction there. They cannot generate code enforcement cases. That falls duly on me and my staff.
Okay.
So I just,
Okay,
but
good,
yes, they are
good.
responsible for, they have the authority to fine, to levy fines, and we always have
Okay.
the attorneys present to make sure we comply.
I just want to make sure that we let people know what they're getting into, and when they're good enough to volunteer, and because of the new regulations we have to comply with, and we have more duties here, even though we're closed down, we have more duties actually right now.
Yes, ma'am, my staff is doing extra duty right now to support other departments.
Right, and so, okay, all right. I will open up for questions from the commissioners. Any questions, Vice Mayor?
No, thank you for the clarification on all of that, and I appreciate your interest in serving. We need all of the able people that we can commandeer. So thank you for volunteering.
Commissioner Samora?
Thank you for volunteering, and you appear to be very well credentialed. Have you checked to see when the meetings are scheduled, and will you be able to accommodate the meeting schedules?
Yes, and I apologize. I believe if I'm incorrect or not, please let me know, but I was under the impression all the meetings were on Tuesdays, I think either at 5 or 6 o'clock. Is that the first Tuesday of every month?
Actually, Mr. Wilson, I don't know where to look to talk to you, but the Code Board is usually the last Wednesday of the month at 2 o'clock, and it convenes when needed. It's not every month.
Okay. Yeah, that shouldn't be a problem. I've already accommodated that with my employer, so he understands what I'm doing, so that shouldn't be a problem at all.
Very good, thank you.
Commissioner George, any comment, questions?
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, I would just ask that, Mr. Wilson, since you are a general contractor, I presume you understand if you ever are called on a case that you're working on that would present a conflict of interest. So I would just, refer you to use the resources of our city attorney to evaluate those types of circumstances. And, you're the only applicant. So, I think that's probably congratulations there, or I'm sorry. But also, please do utilize, upon your appointment, presuming you'll be appointed, the resources of sunshine law training as well, and open records training. Make sure you don't put yourself in any jeopardy by, talking to a board member or, not properly saving public records. So just avail yourself of those resources, and thank you so much for being willing to serve. It's all of our community, and we all got to chip in to keep it as wonderful as it is.
Absolutely.
Commissioner George, very good points. Thank you so much. Commissioner Romrell, any questions?
No, thank you, Mr. Wilson, for applying and wanting to engage in the community and be part of it in a larger way than what you're doing currently. And I appreciate it, and I think Commissioner George said enough to keep this meeting moving. So I wanted to say thank you and good luck, and please be mindful of what Commissioner George said. Thank you.
With no other questions, I will ask for a motion to appoint Mr. Patrick Wilson to our Code Enforcement Board.
So moved.
Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Roll call vote, please.
Commissioner George?
Yes.
Commissioner Samora?
Yes.
Commissioner Romrell?
Yes.
Mayor England?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Kostka?
Yes.
Motion passes unanimously.
All right, thank you, and congratulations to Mr. Wilson and Mr. Law, as would you make sure that he gets the proper information and support for training so he can comply with all our rules and code enforcement?
Yes, ma'am, we'll get him up to speed.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, now we can go on to public hearings, and the first one is a,
Ma'am,
yes?
There are two proclamations
My goodness,
under the appointments.
yeah, I'm moving too quickly, aren't I?
Yes.
Thank you.
Proclamation for Sexual Assault Awareness Month.
Right.
And Water Conservation Month. You could do all those two in one motion.
Okay, all right. We do have two proclamations in our booklet. One is to declare April 2020 as Sexual Assault Awareness Month, although the month is almost over. And the second one is to declare April 2020 as Water Conservation Month. And I assume that our commissioners have read these two proclamations. I see them in our agenda book and have been available. They are right here. And is there any questions on these proclamations? I'll let anyone speak up if there's questions on these proclamations. Hearing none. Commissioner George, did you have a comment?
I just said no questions.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
So then I will entertain a motion to approve these two proclamations.
Make a motion to approve April as both Sexual Assault Awareness Month and Water Conservation Month.
I'll second.
Roll call vote, please.
Commissioner Samora?
Yes.
Commissioner Romrell?
Yes.
Mayor England?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Kostka?
Yes.
Commissioner George?
Yes.
Motion passes unanimously.
All right. Now, I believe we can move forward to public hearings.
To public comments?
Oh, public comment.
Mayor, do you want to release Mr. Wilson off the Zoom there?
Mr. Wilson is more than welcome to stay.
He's muted.
I think he's saying I have 5 kids and I need to go.
Mr. Wilson, your mic is actually currently muted.
Oh, I apologize. If y'all want me to stay, it's completely up to you. I've got 5 kids to feed, so you let me know what you need me to do.
We will let you sign off.
All right, everyone have a wonderful evening. Thank you so much for the opportunity. Look forward to working with everybody.
Thank you so much. Good night.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
All right, back to the agenda, and we are at public comment. Max, do we have anyone outside who would like to come in and provide public comment?
I see Mr. Reynolds is here, and I'm sure he wants to come.
Please let him in.
Oh, well, Mr. Bender's before you. No, you don't have to do it.
Have them ask if I need it.
If you will, for our record, will you state your name and address?
Nicholas Binder, 232 Big Magnolia Court, St. Augustine Beach, Florida. Thank you for everything you're doing during this crazy time. In terms of continuing meetings, I called your offices today dealing with the reports for the May meeting, and I was advised that it's on the website, which I did find, but I would encourage you to do a limited amount of reports for the commission meeting. To find these pages in the reports, you have to go through the commissioner's book. I'm familiar with that. I've spent 14 years on the school board. I know what books are all about, but it's really time-consuming to go through over a couple hundred pages to find what you need. So for the few pages that you need, and I would cut out the financials from the back of it, you have maybe 10 pages. 10, 12 pages. So I would encourage you to have those for the meetings. Also, as you were talking about earlier, the county is having public comment via the telephone. I would encourage you to do that. You're fortunate tonight, the weather is decent. If it's not, it's going to be impossible to get public comment coming in. You may also need it in the future for some key items, even beyond this emergency, to have public comment coming from the outside. So please consider spending that money for those purposes. On Monday's agenda, you had the St. Augustine Beach Civic Association. My only comment on that is they've been a very useful, helpful organization for the municipality. If you remember about 10 or 12 years ago, Music by the Sea incorporated various restaurants into their programs in the summertime. During this crisis, when it's over, the restaurants will need as much help as you can give them. So please keep that in mind as part of the deliberation for Monday night. I'm going to ask a favor, so I don't have to stay for the next hour and sit outside. On the non-ad valorem, I looked through the book today. I read the reports from Mr. Tedrick. The only thing I would suggest for the public hearings, if you decide to have one in May, have a table showing what the corresponding cost would be for ad valorem increases for a $200,000 house, $500,000, $1 million, and a $2 million home, so that people can compare what the impact will be over those years. The report is excellent, but I would have those extra tables so people know exactly what the story is, comparing apples and apples. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Hey, you two, keep your distance.
Tom Reynolds, 50 Brigantine, 32080.
Good evening, Mr. Reynolds.
Good evening. Non-agenda, you know, it's going to take the commissioners to lobby Stevenson and Hudson to get money here for the city. Rutherford can only do so much. He can pass it. I was very disappointed to hear Congressman Rutherford say that about bailing out cities because they might have problems. Florida is a taker state. We take more than we give. And a lot of the congressmen and a lot of the Republicans are mixed up, like as we all know about Mitch McConnell, and it's making goofy statements like that. Getting back over here to the ordinance, we need 2 ordinances in the city. It's 2020. We got to class this place up a little bit. Drinking in public, what's going on in A Street parking lot? It's gross. People congregating, buying drinks at Jack's Barbecue. That's not right. It doesn't look good. Just so you know, where I come from, we refer to that building as blight. It's an eyesore. In fact, the city should eminent domain that property, knock it right down, and make a nice, beautiful parking lot. Because it is nasty. It's an eyesore. I know everybody loves blood, But you know what, I want to tell you something. Children shouldn't see cigarette smokers and drinkers when they go by A Street. It's nasty, it's old, it's disgusting, it's 70s. Second ordinance. What kind of people drag their trash out and leave it out all weekend?
Mr. Reynolds, since you're not wearing a mask, can I ask you to just keep your remarks, but tone it down just a little bit for us?
You got it, Margaret, no
Thank you.
problem. Now, I want to ask you, what kind of people put trash out in front of their house on Good Friday and leave it out all weekend? I want to tell you what kind of people. A whole lot of residents of St. Augustine Beach. The ones that the condo owners are subsidizing for their trash pickup. Here's how much class they have, 0. Once they realized that they couldn't pull the trash back in, the commissioners couldn't have Public Works Department go pick that trash up on Saturday. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. No class city commissioners. It's going on a long time. I'm looking really forward to the waste disposal tonight. I wish you would have had it up on the agenda a little bit earlier, but I want to tell you something. When you look in the mirror, you're looking at a no-class elected official. It's time to change it. Class up this city.
Just as a comment for the other commissioners to know that we did send code enforcement out. Someone from Brian's office went out to remind all the restaurant owners of the requirements under the governor's executive orders on restaurants, and just a reminder, because people were gathering and not complying with the rules. And it was very visible on the street, so I just want you all to know that.
And as a side note, none of the commissioners are allowed to give any city employees direction. That's only given by the city manager. So we have no authority to order Public Works to pick up trash at any time.
Commissioner George, you have a comment.
Thank you. I just wanted to mention that, that lot in front of Jack's Barbecue, that's city property. So, since this is a public meeting, I'd just like to point that out. I agree, it doesn't look good. It doesn't look good for Jack's Barbecue. It doesn't look good for the city. But there's, the owner of that restaurant does not have legal authority to tell people to disperse off of that city plaza. It is city land. So really, if anything, it's up to the city to disperse those people, but we don't have, ordinances that preclude gathering. All we can do is enforce the governor's executive order. And, I think we should be grateful to the restaurant owner that he was helping us do that. And, he's trying to protect his reputation as well as the city's, but I just want to make it clear for the public record, because of the public comment, that, it's not his land. So that's my only comment. Thank you.
And he did point out other restaurants where our staff from our building department went out and talked to other restaurants and found out there were some that weren't as familiar with the governor's executive orders, and we clarified that. And so we hope things will get a little better, especially with opening up some of the restaurants. Things should ease up a bit. It's a very difficult topic to enforce all this. It really is. Commissioner Romrell, do you have any comments on this topic? Max, do we have any other public comment?
No, Mayor.
Okay, so I will close the public comment period and open up commissioner comments, starting with our vice mayor.
Thank you, Mayor England. First, I would like to take this time to thank our entire community in your cooperation during this crisis. The requirements have posed challenges to many of us, physically, psychologically, and emotionally. However, it was due to the cooperation of our citizens and our residents that our county in total has remained well below the national average % of positive cases. And for this, we are all thankful. I do have some updates, as I have attended all of the Emergency County Commission meetings since the initiation of the county state of emergency. I have some important informational updates just in case you missed the last meeting. Currently, St. Johns County has a rate of 4% of positive tests. This is well below the state average of 9%, and the state average used to be 14%. As stated yesterday, St. Johns County has experienced over 14 days of a downward trend, which positions us well for phasing in of the reopening of our economy. Cindy Stevenson was present and gave a presentation. She gave an update on the unemployment program and application process for the state of Florida. Unemployment claims in the state of Florida have increased more than 1,000% compared to last year, just in the last 2 months. If anyone has experienced employment disruption due to the COVID situation, she encourages anyone to go to floridajobs.org to file your initial application for unemployment. She did state that the site is not easy to navigate, so she gave the helpful hint of being sure to use the frequently asked questions tab so that you're able to gather all of the information that you need to complete your application before you begin filling out the application. She cautioned against filing more than once, as it will prolong the process. To help business recovery, the county is developing its own loan program to aid small businesses. The plan is still being created and changes daily, but the proposed date of launch is May 15th. This program will utilize CBDG funds that have been specifically granted to the county due to the COVID crisis. I'm also serving on the County Economic Recovery Task Force, along with the other community leaders, including Richard Goldman from the VCB, Tara Meeks from TDC, Isabel Renault from the St. Johns County Chamber of Commerce, Melissa Nelson from the United Way, Joy Andrews, who's the Assistant County Administrator, and many other talented individuals from the county administration and the community. The task force was established in early April with the first phone conference held on May 17th. I'd like to share some of the information this group has been working on. To date, we have set up 2 hotlines to help our community needs. One hotline is for community needs and one is for business needs. The hotline phone numbers are posted on, I believe, our city webpage as well as the county webpage for anyone needing assistance. There is also a business damage assessment survey that businesses throughout the county are encouraged to complete. This provides valuable information to the county and helps identify where the needs are so that they can be met. Anyone who is in need, please reach out. Most of the requests for both community and businesses have been in help with rent, mortgages, utilities, and food. There are also resources for legal help if anyone is in need of advice due to the threat of eviction or any other legal need. Please understand that there is an overwhelming number of calls, and if you can't get through, please be patient and keep trying. If you do leave a message, please be assured that someone will get back to you, usually within 24 hours. The need for assistance has gone far and above any requests ever for any hurricane and is nearing the last 2 hurricanes combined. Over 5,000 people in St. Johns County have lost their jobs. Businesses that have reported, which is only 31 of the nearly slightly over 1,000 businesses that we have throughout the county, have lost over $1.5 million in revenue since March 17th. Our food banks are depleted. In an effort to replenish the shelves, Melissa Nelson from the United Way has organized a food drive-through at the amphitheater on Saturday, May 9th, from 9 a.m. till 4 p.m. You can drop off non-perishable items and are encouraged to be as generous as you can. It is a drive-through event. Please share the information with as many people as you know, and let's help fill those bare shelves. The main focus of the task force at this point is to provide clear industry guidelines and expectations in preparation for opening, complying with the state guidelines so that we all can offer a sense of uniformity across the county and between the cities. our next meeting, phone conference, will be Friday. We have a lot of information to discuss in light of the governor's address today, which from his address, we will be moving into the next phase as early as Monday. I believe that the new guidelines start on Monday. That's all that I have.
Thank you very much, Vice Mayor. And Commissioner Samora, any comments from you tonight?
Thank you, Vice Mayor. That was an excellent update, and thanks for sitting in and attending all those meetings and participating. I would just like to echo your thanks to the community and to law enforcement and Max, Bill, your staff. It seems like it's been a long time since we've been together, and so much has changed on a daily basis, and everyone is adjusting and adapting responsibly, quickly, to do what's best for the community. And I would just like to remind everyone in the community, as we move into phase one and start to reopen things, do it responsibly. It's going to be nice. Everyone's going to be out to see their neighbors and visit again safely, distancing and following the guidelines. But let's be respectful, and I worry about the law enforcement and how we're going to handle some things as we open back up. But I'm sure the community is going to do the right thing and be responsible. So that's all for now.
Commissioner George, your comments, please.
Thank you, Mayor, and thanks to the report from the Vice Mayor. That was great. I'd just like to bring to the Commission's attention and put in a request to staff that we get an update on what the maintenance plan is for our city parks. I've received some complaints lately about lack of vegetative maintenance, especially at the Lakeside Park and along 16th Street and all of the other little parkettes. So I just, it's been a while. I used to get regular complaints about the condition of the Ocean Hammock Park, and I've spoken with Mr. Tredick over the years about that. I understand most of those complaints were about the actual parking surface, and because it's really susceptible to potholes and all. But this is a different kind of a maintenance complaint. So could we just get an update, Mr. Tredick, if not tonight, maybe at the next meeting on Monday, about whether we actually have a cycle for that type of maintenance, and whether you could just go through and have one of your crew members take a look and try to clean it up. That's my only comment. Other than just echoing all the good job that citizens have done, dealing with the difficulties of COVID. Thank you, Mayor. I'll keep it brief since I'm remotely present.
Thank you. Mr. Tredick, would you like to respond right now?
Yes, please.
To what extent you can?
We do have a cycle for that, which is normally more frequent than has been in the last month. Over the last month, we've been focusing on essential services primarily. Doing the park maintenance, we're also coming out of a dry cycle, so we weren't doing as much mowing. We started focusing on essential services, which is mostly solid waste, and and we've changed our shifts. We've done a lot of work to try to keep people separated during this pandemic and try to reduce the chance of transmission between staff members, because we all get together at lunchtime, they all come in at the same time, at least that's how it used to be. And there's some risk of transmission between people. So we've now developed a shift system. We're kind of going through some massaging that a bit, trying to make it work so that we don't have more than a few people together at any one time. We are getting back to that being more back to the old cycle. So I think you'll see that pick up very quickly here, the maintenance of the parkettes. And we've actually been talking about that this week, that we need to get ahead of that again. But yeah, it will be done on a routine. Now that we're getting into the wetter season, you'll see that regularly maintained.
Mr.
That makes a lot of sense. Thank you for that. I'll communicate that out. It makes a lot of sense that, due to the restrictions of COVID, we had to rein it in, and that sounds like a smart approach, as long as it's temporary. Thank you again.
Absolutely temporary.
Mr. Tredick, have you had a shortage of staff? Has there been an issue there?
We have not. We've been very fortunate. We haven't had anybody get COVID, so we've had a couple of sick people here and there where we've had to, they got a test, came back negative, but we haven't had anybody out for COVID other than while they waited to get results.
Thank you. Commissioner Romrell, your comments tonight.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Vice Mayor, for what a great detailed information about the recovery for St. Johns County and the plan moving forward for our small businesses and large businesses who have been greatly affected by COVID-19. I also want to thank Mr. Tredick. During all of this and prior to COVID-19, we had applied for a grant for the WEIR. And I'm happy to announce with Mr. Tredick that it looks like we did get the funding. We just now have to wait for the state, but it's about $600,000 if Mr. Tredick would like to jump in there, but that would mean $0 now to our citizens and to our taxpayers to replace that. So what people don't see during this is that business is still moving. And I'm very thankful to have Mr. Tredick who worked really hard to get that grant, and I'm looking forward to that to be completely funded by the state and helping us move forward with issues that we had from the hurricanes. Again, I'm thankful for the citizens to pay attention for the most part of what's been going on. I think that they've realized the faster that we can get back together and get to some normalcy, life will turn better for everybody. So those are just my comments tonight, but I really do appreciate Vice Mayor, again, going over such a detailed information of the recovery process for the county and for the city. The last thing I want to bring up, Mayor, if I may, City Manager John Regan reached out to me about they had purchased some masks, and he is happy to share with businesses here in St. Augustine Beach the purchase of those masks. So when the time comes, if there's businesses that need that for their restaurants or other businesses that they need, the city of St. Augustine is welcome to team up with also our businesses here in St. Augustine Beach, because we're all in this together, and I just wanted to lay that out there as well.
Thank you. I'm going to get back to the mask issue, but in the meantime, Mr. Tredick, do you want to comment on the grants, the wonderful news about the grants? And thank you, Commissioner Romrell. You want to comment on that, Mr. Tredick?
I don't have a tremendous amount more to add, except it's the exact number is $632,000. It covers the full 25% that would have had to been paid by the city. So the other 75% will be through the HMGP grant, the FEMA funding. So the commissioner's right. This project now will be fully funded by outside sources, and it won't hit our ad valorem taxes at all. So we just recently got our justification for the revised budget to the state, and it looks like the numbers will work. So as far as the cost benefit, so I'm hoping we will have Phase 2, which is the construction approved by the state this summer, hopefully as early as possible in the summer. We'll be able to go out to bids on it sometime in the summer and be ready to go October 1st when the Water Management District money becomes available.
It's wonderful news. I'm going to jump in here before I go, since Commissioner Romrell mentioned masks. I did also have a conversation with John Regan after I read the article in the paper about the mask. The one other thing, he's got a Kinsa project, a thermometer app that is in St. Augustine, and he also said he was considering extending that project outside the boundaries of St. Augustine and maybe into St. Augustine Beach. So our staff and we will stay in contact with him to maybe join up with him on that project, and then on the mask also, when we publish and communicate with our communications manager and we open up, we'll make that information available and work with him on making, these are 2-ply paper disposable mask at a very low price, and we'll work with them to make sure our businesses know how to get those masks. In addition, there was an article in our newsletter about a resident that was making washable cloth masks. And she has, and then there's 2 residents actually in our community that are making these washable cloth masks. And some of the masks went to the police department and some went to our city hall. But I was talking to Max and talking to our communications manager, and if the commissioners are in favor of this project, we are thinking of trying to get the 2 ladies and some volunteers together to mask up St. Augustine Beach and provide these washable cloth masks to our residents of St. Augustine Beach via a suggested donation, or if you can't donate, for free. We haven't worked out the details yet, but we believe it would be possible, if there's no objection to the commissioners, to let our communications manager and get going on that project, and then somehow we'll get this available for our residents. It doesn't protect anyone, but it is a courtesy. It is a courtesy to protect others from our coughs or anything. So I'm going to ask for your blessing and ask for your questions or concerns on this. Vice Mayor.
I have no comment.
Okay, all right. Commissioner Samora.
The plan, again, is there a cost to the city for this, or is it?
No, there would not be a cost to the city, because it's volunteer, and then any donations that come in would go back to the volunteers, so there would not be any cost to the city.
No other questions, I guess. That
Okay.
sounds fine.
Commissioner George.
Would the city be collecting the donations? I guess I would be concerned about that, giving more of an impression that the city was, selling them or assuming any liability related to them, that kind of thing. I think it's great. I think that promoting it at whatever the city can do to help is great, as long as, legal clears it, so that we're not either representing the capacity of the masks, because we're not doing testing on them, in other words, and as long as we're not getting entangled up in the finances in any way that the city attorney would believe could put us at risk. Otherwise, I think it's great. I think it's noble. I think it's a good talking point to keep people engaged in their health as the state starts to open back up. I think it's important for people to still be protected. So thank you for working on it.
We'll be sure to address your concerns, and I agree, those are good concerns on where we make them available, and some of the businesses may want to make them available, and it will be on a donation basis, and so how we collect those donations, that's a good question. Thank you. Commissioner Romrell.
I have no objection. I think it's great. It shows community involvement. To Commissioner George's comments, I think as long as we're not liable for anything, I'm okay with it. I think it's great.
There wasn't, what got me going on this, there was an article in one of the tabloids that we get via our email, and it was the city of Winston-Salem, North Carolina, did the same project for their residents. And I think there's some other cities that are doing this, so we'll look into how they're doing it and see if we can do this, because it is a courtesy as you go into a retail store or you go into the pharmacy. It is a courtesy for others, and I noticed that, and there may be some businesses that say no shoes, no no shirt, no mask, no service. So I don't know. We'll see what happens as we start to open up. But it is a courtesy when you wear a mask when you go out. So thank you all for your green light to kind of go forward, and we'll keep you informed on all the details.
It may be as easy as setting up just a link on our webpage to put it directly into their hands and keep it completely out of our hands. I mean, it might be something very simple.
Okay, good point, good thought. Thank you for that, and that's my comments for tonight. So I'll ask Chief, do you have any comments?
No, ma'am. We've actually, as you know, I give you a daily update through the EOC. We do have a staff meeting tomorrow morning with some key players just to go over what the governor's order came out with tonight. Some of the things that are in the governor's order are essential services, as far as like surgery, selective surgeries are going to be back in place. 25% of business of the occupancy of the restaurants, which Brian Law and I were talking about here before we stepped in. Outdoor seating for our restaurants. Also, too, he did not approve the bars, which we have no bars in our jurisdiction. He did not approve the beauty salons and barber shops or gyms for workout. He did not approve that this time in phase 1. So we got some things we're going to work out tomorrow. We'll get with city staff and work some things out. I do have to applaud Brian Law. You have truly stepped up, my friend, and helped out the city police department with a lot of, I won't call them complaints. I think more so clarification of what the executive orders are. And you have been critical in helping us staff these complaints. I'm sure you've paid attention. We've had an uptick. The law enforcement present today was a murder-suicide just down the street from our jurisdiction. So we've had an uptick in some violent crimes in the southeast part of our county, which is our jurisdiction. So I think we're going to see more of that, but hopefully this thing opens up on Monday and we get a little bit of fresh air. We are considering opening the beaches up on Monday morning along the lines of Jacksonville, Duval County, as Flagler County has done. I'll get a better specifics of what we're going to do as far as what we're going to do on Monday morning, but it looks like we're going to go to open from sunrise to sunset. Same restrictions in place. However, my officers, just not a fan of my officers exposing themselves to a family that's sitting on a beach towel with 2 small children and they're getting fresh air. So again, we'll work through these issues as we've done in the last 6 weeks, and we'll deal with the things that are going on. But I appreciate your support through this time. We're at full staff in our agency. As you know, I've kept you in abreast of the situations over there. So with that being said, again, thank you for your support. And our community has, I do have to say one thing, our community has been phenomenal. I mean, they've been just really good to us. I can't tell you how many meals they've fed our agency, the Sheriff's Office, St. John's County Fire and Rescue, just supportive of our men and women. I can't thank them enough. So thank you for allowing me to speak, Mayor, Commissioners.
Thank you. Max, do you have any comments tonight?
No, ma'am. No.
All right. Mr. Tredick, any additional comments? No. Mr. Law, Building Department.
Are we doing like the end of the meeting comments now?
Actually,
I'm okay with it. I just.
Okay. Well, yeah, I guess I have moved staff comments.
Okay, I'm flexible.
Okay.
Well, great news. We've just got our results back from our annual recertification for the community rating system, which is your flood program. No deficiencies, and we maintain our 10% discount, which is great news. Bill Ward has resigned from the city. He gave plenty of notice. Jennifer Thompson is now your code enforcement officer, and she has successfully completed your Florida Association code enforcement test with a passing score. So as I understand it, she's the first female certified code enforcement officer the city's had. And we had about 4 or 5 months of transition between the two, so it was just as smooth as can be, and she's been a great asset to helping the police department. And speaking of the restaurants that you alluded to, I did a go-to them with the code enforcement officer, as I know most owners and managers of the restaurants here, and they were great. So,
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Mr. Johns, do you have anything else since you have already addressed us on IT issues? Okay, all right. So I think we are ready to go to public hearing. Is that right, Max?
Yes, ma'am.
All right, okay. Been anxious to get to that tonight. All right, our first public hearing is on the conditional renewal of a conditional use permit for Terra and Aqua for outdoor seating. Mr. Law?
All right, as you know, Terra Aqua does have an outdoor seating. It's in the Seagrove Plaza. Its 5-year conditional use permit is up for renewal for next month. Planning and Zoning Board recommended approval with a 15-year time frame. That coincides with the lease they just signed.
Okay,
So,
that makes sense.
but now's a great time. I've been talking about this for 2 years, that if way to help our businesses, and I know it's too late for Terra Aqua because the legal advertising, everything's already run its course. But if we have a conditional use permit for an outdoor seating or a educational facility, and we've had no complaints, and it's not a change of use, then we could always have the possibility of giving them an indefinite conditional use permit. They would still apply to you unless it was a development process, but it would eliminate the need for the businesses to continue coming back, as any complaints would be handled by Chief Hardwick's staff or my staff. Some of your restaurants don't come for conditional use permits because it's built into the development order. So it's just an option to help out the businesses. It would save them about $410 every application period.
But Planning and Zoning has recommended a 15-year term.
That coincides with the brand-new lease they just
lease.
signed before
Okay.
the pandemic took place.
All right. Do you have any further comments?
We've received no complaints about Terra
Okay.
Aqua since I've been here.
Is the applicant on here tonight?
No.
Okay, all right, or not, and not on the phone, right?
No.
Okay, all right. Well, then, I'll see if there's any questions from the commissioners. Vice Mayor?
No, everything looks to be in order.
Commissioner Samora?
No, my only comments were along the lines of, I think what you may have been alluding to, it seems as though these come up, these conditional use permits for outdoor dining or music, and they continue to get approved, and I'm wondering if we need to update our ordinance.
Well, actually, if I may, you wouldn't actually have to update your ordinance.
I'm wondering if it may be time to update our ordinance.
You would update your policy and your expiration date. The ordinance itself still says outdoor dining. A perfect example, you can choose a restaurant in your head, one that doesn't have outside seating right now. Let's say they applied for a building permit to build a little shade structure and had outdoor dining. That should still come in front of the board.
I'm wondering if
it's once in a lifetime.
It's not something we need to answer now, but just keep that in mind. It just seems like we're getting automatic approval on these things, and I don't know if that may be a dated ordinance, is all I'm saying.
And honestly, I believe the city is losing money. So it's $400, and then it goes to the Planning and Zoning Board legal advertising, goes to the commission legal advertising again, but it's also the staff time to prepare the case, to transcribe the minutes from both boards. So one half of it comes from the Planning and Zoning budget, and the other half comes from Ms. Beverly and her staff out of the general fund. So it's just an idea to help out the small businesses, thin out the government a little bit more.
Okay.
But I don't believe it would require a rewrite of an ordinance. You would just extend, some restaurants, as I understand it from a long time ago, have an infinite life on their conditional use. It's
All right.
transferable. So if we do consider that down the road, I would recommend that as long as it's not a change of use, which means to say it was a golf ball shop and then it became a restaurant. That would require the commission's approval or the planning and zoning's, whatever you decided.
All right, well, we'll take some improvements offline,
Right.
not for tonight, and we'll stick to this particular request. And so, Commissioner George, do you have any questions for Mr. Law, or this request?
Thank you, Mayor. My question would be directed toward our city attorney. I would want to know whether there's a higher standard of proof or testimony for the revocation of a conditional use permit as opposed to the granting of one, rather the granting of a renewal. That's going to be a critical, point for making the decision whether to have either an indefinite approval or a long-term approval such as the 15-year that's been recommended. I've always seen the renewal as an opportunity to kind of reassess how the neighbors are handling the use. And, it's a political environment. A lot of people, maybe they don't want to come out, but they want to make their comments known to commissioners, their experiences known. Sometimes they'll email, sometimes they'll call, sometimes they'll just want to speak to, not embarrass somebody on the spot. And so I just want to make sure we don't tie the hands of a future commission by making it harder for the public's concerns to be heard and evaluated. So can we get that answer, please, before we vote?
Yeah, so the revocation of a conditional use permit would be depending on the actions of the applicant and the business to whom the permit was originally given. In that if there's something in the permit that, a condition inside the permit that is not followed within a 5-year period or a 15-year period or an indefinite period, then the permit is able to be revoked. I share Commissioner Undine's concern in that an indefinite period of time does not allow for circumstances outside the establishment to be considered, which is why conditional use permits are granted in the first place, which is it takes into consideration the surrounding parcels, the neighborhood, the community as a whole, and those are factors that are constantly in flux. So as time progresses, the neighborhood may change in 5 years and 10 years, and a conditional use permit, when granted earlier in time, may not be appropriate to be renewed later in time, based on those changes in the neighborhood. So I'm not sure that granting indefinite conditional uses is the best way to go about it. It may be a better approach to address some of those issues in an ordinance and be able to better define and drill down when alcohol may be served outdoors instead. I think there's just a better avenue to do that than a conditional use.
Commissioner, and thank you, Mr. Douglas. Commissioner Romrell, your questions.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. I think that was a good question Commissioner George had for legal. It's a double-edged sword, right? If it's taking staff time and we're losing money on applications, and we could be using those resources for something else, and obviously we want to kind of streamline things in that sense. However, on the legality side, the perspective from the attorney, where, if a neighborhood changes or something like that, the question I guess I have, Mayor, is that, as neighborhood changes, if you buy a house by a restaurant, it's no different, in my opinion, than buying by the airport and then complaining that the airplanes are flying over you. And so if you buy, say, we'll use Seagrove as a example because that's where this property is located. That's a mixed-use place in the front. And so I think, maybe case by case we can look at it, and maybe we can get a better handle from legal moving forward. But, I think talking to Mr. Law earlier this week, I think there's some people who have anxiety. I know that when the school came to us about getting their permit issued longer, there was some anxiety, and the kids came and they were worried that, hey, this could be taken away from us and stuff like that. So if we can find a real true balance that will help both the businesses and the community, I think that's something we need to look at. I think, legal, that may be a longer question and answer. I don't know if you want to answer it now or if that's something that we need to look at, as Mr. Law had said, updating some of our regulations.
Yeah, I agree, especially in those longer considerations where an indefinite time period is what would be requested, that a zoning change should be looked at instead of going through the conditional use route.
Well, I'm not in favor of a extended, or not extended, but an open or indefinite time period for a conditional use. I just think we need to have a definite time period on a conditional use order. So I think for tonight's request, and I don't see, I see the current conditional use, but I don't see a draft of the one we're supposed to approve. Do we have to have one in the packet?
We have public comment on this item.
Okay, all right, so before I go any further in my questions, if Vice Mayor, if you want to allow public comment.
Tom Reynolds, 50 Brigantine Court. I urge the commission to vote yes, and I base that on it's private property. That's where alcoholic beverages belong, not in a city parking lot. I'm going to keep it real simple. Private property, restaurant, patio, yes. City parking lots, no.
Thank you, Mr. Reynolds. Any other public comment, Max?
No, ma'am.
Okay. Vice Mayor, you didn't have any more public comment, right?
No, ma'am.
Okay, all right. So, we're at a point to, Mr. Douglas, do we need to have in our packet the order itself, the sample order, a new order to approve?
No, this is a renewal, so it's to the time period only. The other conditions in the original order would still apply.
Okay. So we are ready to accept a motion to extend the current conditional use permit with maybe a change to the period of time. If a commissioner would like to make a motion to approve with any changes.
Mayor?
Yes, Commissioner George.
Okay. I would make a motion to approve the renewal of the conditional use permit with the 15-year recommendation. I would just like to explain that, that is not contradicting of my prior statement. I think that the particular geographical orientation of this property is completely different from some other applications we've seen before, as well as others. It is surrounded by a huge parking lot as well as other commercial structures that buffer the sound. And I feel that, if the Planning Zoning Board has also evaluated this in the context of public comment, I'd be willing to go with their suggestion or a 10-year one. But, in this particular property, I don't see a problem with that long of an approval. But I just want to emphasize it's very specific to this specific property. And so I just wanted to make those comments, but in the context of making the motion to approve the recommendation.
Okay, any changes to the commissioner's suggested motion?
No, I'll second it.
All right, roll call vote, please.
Commissioner Romrell?
Yes.
Mayor England?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Kostka?
Yes.
Commissioner George?
Yes.
Commissioner Samora?
Yes.
Motion passes unanimously.
Okay, the next public hearing is a request for modification to the final development order for Sea Colony subdivision. And Mr. Law, please give us some background on this one, please.
Yes, ma'am. Sea Colony was approved in the late 90s and the multiple phases through the early 2000s. Sea Colony's pretty much built out, as I understand it, is about 10 lots, give or take some. That's still have construction. The problem with Sea Colony is, as I understand it, they thought it was a PUD. Well, it's not. All the development orders show low-density residential. I believe one refers to a cluster development, which is traditionally a floodplain management tool. That's where we build the houses or the buildings on the good property, and we use the not-so-good property for passive or active recreation, water management, stuff like that. Sea Colony was a beautifully sited location in regards to the special flood hazard areas, the coastal construction control line, and it still is. Unfortunately, Sea Colony has been operating for 20 years out of their HOA guidelines, ARB, and they are very thorough in their reviews. So the problem I came across about a year and a half ago, and that's how long my staff has been working on this, is if a hurricane stalls off the coast, there is no protection from Sea Colony. If these houses were substantially damaged, I have no mechanism to allow the reconstruction of them to 5-foot setbacks, the 42-foot tall towers, anything that's been underway for 20 years. I feel very confidently that if we were to cease and desist letting Sea Colony construct its last remaining houses in the way it's done it for 20 years, it could very well put the city in jeopardy. I have reached out to city attorneys. I've spoken to the ARB, the HOA, architects that were involved with the inception of the Sea Colony, the developers. This is the right decision, in my opinion. This brings Sea Colony into conformance. We're modifying the development order. It's been through the Planning and Zoning Board where they recommended approval. But this now gives me the ability in the event of a natural disaster to let the residents rebuild their houses to what they have. This is not an increase in anything they've been doing. These snippets you're seeing in the final modification are actually right out of their design manual.
Thank you, Mr. Law, and I just want to summarize what you said again, just to make sure, because we have received public comment, and I wanted to let the people who sent us email that we will not be reading all the public comment that we received via email tonight, but it will be in the public record. But I did want to make sure we clarify and make it very clear that this is something based on your review. You noticed a gap in some of the original documentation, so that this is not anything different. It does not increase any setbacks, increase any height, or increase any impervious surface. It does not make any increases or do anything different to Sea Colony that they were doing and have been doing for 20 years under their architectural design and the intent. And this is to correct something, an oversight in the original documentation. Nothing more, nothing less. Is that correct?
I would agree with that statement.
Okay, then do we have the applicant or a presenter on the line tonight? Okay, all right. And because of some of the public comments that were received, I want to give each commissioner an opportunity to ask questions. Vice Mayor.
No, I actually had a conversation with Mr. Law about this a couple of days ago.
Okay. Commissioner Samora.
I am all too familiar with it, and I have no questions.
Okay, and just for the public, I was a resident of Sea Colony and always thought it was a PUD. Never knew that it didn't have PUD documentation. I thought for sure when I bought in there that I received the documentation, but it was not exact, and we're making a correction, and I no longer live there. But Commissioner
And full
Samora.
disclosure, I do live in there.
Okay.
And I did speak with the attorneys. They have no issues with me weighing in or voting on the matter. I've got no other interest outside of it other than my home, which is already built and unaffected by this. I will also reinforce what you said. As of 10 years ago, I served on the ARB and the Board of Directors in Sea Colony. I was the chair of the ARB, and I can tell you these practices, what we're codifying here, for lack of a better word, has been in effect for at least that long. There's nothing in here that hasn't been already done.
All right. Commissioner George.
No questions, Mayor. Thank you so much.
Commissioner Romrell.
Thank you, Mayor. I also spoke with legal today, as I live in Sea Colony, and they assured me I'm okay on this as well. And I also spoke with Brian Law earlier in the week, and essentially what this is essentially housekeeping that just needs to be brought to the table. And so those are my comments, and thank you.
Okay. So we are ready to entertain a motion, but for the public again, just to make sure there is clarification, there is nothing new in this modification. There is no increases. There's nothing that is different for Sea Colony that has been going on for the past 20 years. It's been in existence. This is to correct some documentation on an oversight, and that is it. So with that, I'll entertain, do we need to read do we need to read something legally?
Is there any public comment from the folks in attendance?
Any public comment? Max, will you double check with Mr. Reynolds? Okay. Is there something we have to read tonight? It's not an ordinance, it's just a,
Page 9 is your final development order modification to the previous final development orders. If you want, I can read that first paragraph. Long, but I can do it.
yes, go ahead.
Yes, ma'am. Final development order file number FD 2020-1, approving modification to final development file numbers FD 97-06, final development 98-04, final development 99-02, final development 2001-03, and final development 2003-02. This cause came for public hearing before the City Commission of the City of St. Augustine Beach, Florida on the 6th day of April 2020, extension, upon application of the final development file, final development 2020-01 by James N. McGarvey Jr. and Timothy S. McGarvey, agents for Sea Colony Architectural Review Board and Sea Colony Neighbors Association Incorporated, 100 Sea Colony Parkway, St. Augustine Beach, Florida, 32080. For modification to final development files number, final development 97-06, 98-04, 99-02, 2001-03, 2003-02, per section 12.02.10 Bravo of the City of St. Augustine Beach Land Development Regulations to specify regulations for building setbacks, impervious coverage, building height for the various lots and housing types in Sea Colony Units 1, 2, 3, and 4 of the Beach Club at Anastasia Residential Cluster Development in a low-density residential land use district at 100 Sea Colony Parkway, St. Augustine Beach, Florida, 32080, as attached entitled Amendment to the Final Development Orders of Sea Colony of the Beach Club of Anastasia, all phases. The City Commission, having reviewed and considered the application, the report of the Building and Zoning Department, the recommendation of the Comprehensive Planning and Zoning Board of St. Augustine Beach, which reviewed and considered the application on the 24th day of March 2020, the testimony, statements, and evidence presented before the Comprehensive Planning and Zoning Board and the City Commission by the applicant and other persons speaking at the public hearing, including public comments, and the City Commission finding it has jurisdiction over this proceeding, and that the required notices have been provided and were afforded to all parties upon motion duly made, second, and passed, and the application was approved based on the following finding of facts.
Mr. Law, thank you, but I do want to point out that the one that is in our book, the sample that is in our book, is not the one that we are making a motion on and approving tonight. There is another version that was distributed to the commissioners today, and
I can go over that.
we probably need to go over that.
Yes, ma'am. Sorry, commissioners. So upon conversation with the city attorneys this morning, it was decided that section 3 on ordered as is this portion is strucken from the final development modification order. This was on the basis of the city attorney. The Building and Zoning Department had no objection to this.
Brian, the commissioners from joining remotely can't actually see that.
I know, but I emailed it to him.
Okay.
I don't have no way to get to him. I guess I can hold it up in front of there if you want.
Commissioner George, did you have an opportunity to see the changes that were made to the final development order?
No, I did not. I'm trying to look at my emails here to see if there is in fact something.
Commissioner Romrell, did you have an opportunity to see the change?
I did.
Okay. And quite frankly, the sentence that was eliminated, I agree with, it did cause some questions. And Brian, if you will just read that sentence that has been eliminated,
Yes, ma'am.
struck out.
Sentence is, however, persons acquiring property do so with notice that although under appropriate circumstances, owners of property have vested rights, changes in the City of St. Augustine Beach land development regulations affecting use would not be acquired under the transfer of ownership.
And I will tell you that I received questions on that and I struggled to answer. And so I'm very grateful that our city attorneys did check this and make a recommendation to delete that language because you received questions. And so with the commissioners, if there's no other questions about this change, I will make a motion, since there's no public comment, I will make a motion to approve the modification to the final development order that was read by Mr. Law as amended today.
I'll second that.
There is a second. Roll call vote, please.
Just one moment to record a motion and second. All right, Mayor England?
Yes?
Vice Mayor Kostka?
Yes.
Commissioner George?
Yes.
Commissioner Samora?
Yes.
Commissioner Romrell?
Yes.
Motion passes unanimously.
Thank you. The next item on the agenda is proposed ordinance number 20-04, the second public hearing and final reading to amend the land development regulations by establishing section 5.06 for dune protection.
Yes, ma'am.
All right. Thank you.
All right, this is the final reading for the protection of the Dune ordinance. And keep in mind, this is required under our new comprehensive plan that we establish this. We had spoken previously, and I said that we are in communication with Fish and Game. We were closing in, as I understand it. They did get permission from the higher-ups to assist us, but then the pandemic happened, so we're on a little hold on getting help from Fish and Game. But my recommendation is that we approve this so it creates a starting point for that ordinance and it can continue to grow as other agencies lend assistance. There has been no changes since the last reading.
All right, are there any questions for Mr. Law on this? It's a second reading. Hearing none, then open for public comment.
There is a public comment.
Homeowners, 50 Brigantine. I just want to see if this is the exact one. Is this the one we came up with because Dr. Grimes had the dunes trimmed down and the city didn't have an ordinance, so they went and created an ordinance. Instead of us having a nice walkover when Dr. Grimes was going to pay for it, we don't have one there. But what we have is a city creating more government. Interesting. No walkover. All these people tried to screw Dr. Grimes. It was terrible.
If there's no other public comment,
No, Mayor, there's no other public comment.
all right, then is there, and there was no questions or further questions from commissioners, so I think we're ready to read the ordinance, the
Excuse me, Mayor?
caption, which are legal.
Excuse me, Mayor.
Oh, yes.
I'm sorry to interrupt. Something that did occur to me that I'm just to hear from other commissioners their thoughts on the language for the exception, the dune walkovers. I feel like my recollection anyway is that when we were discussing that exception, does that need to be, any kind of reference to government constructed dune walkovers? Do we need to not limit it that way? This is just something that occurred to me, and I'd just like some feedback on that question. I mean, I do know sometimes private properties do install dune walkovers on their own, but should it be? I guess maybe Mr. Law could provide some insight on whether there's additional permitting requirements or a private dune walkover that would provide sufficient protection for the dunes, so that this exception doesn't get accidentally, broadened.
Okay, that's a great question. Dune walkovers are still required to be permitted by a DEP. They have a standard that they provide. I am not a huge fan of local building departments permitting dune walkovers or ramps, especially for commercial structures, as I've found that what they have may not comply with the accessibility code. So their intention is to limit the interference of the natural dunes as far as handrails, so the wind and all that can blow through there. That would not that would violate our Chapter 10 of the building code. So usually dune walkovers are handled by DEP. As far as if we need to strengthen it for government or not, we did add the exception, other exceptions approved by the Comprehensive Planning and Zoning Board in case we miss something, because I can't anticipate everything that's going to happen to that dune line. But as far as private dunes, it's private property, and if they get permission from DEP, and keep in mind the whole purpose of a dune walkover is not to disturb the dune, so you go up and over it. I like them. I like them better than I like a cut in
I
the
think
dune.
that was kind of the main source of my concern, is that a dune walkover by definition means something structural, as opposed to just shearing down the vegetation and chopping down a little walk-through area. So if you can confirm that definition, then I think my concern
Well, how
is resolved.
about, and this is just an idea, and I'm moving fast with this one, dune walkovers that leave something, I'll need help on that, the integrity of the dune.
Well, what about just approved dune walkovers? Because a dune walkover by definition is, like you said, and it's not cutting into the dune, it's a walkover. And so just by putting the word approved, will that address your concern, Commissioner George?
Yeah, I think so. If the DEP definition of a dune walkover is a structure that leaves intact the dune, then yes, a permitted dune walkover would probably be appropriate language.
Okay. All right, where are we?
And with that modification, I'll make a motion to approve ordinance number 20-04.
Second.
Do we need a reading of the ordinance, the paragraph?
I can just read it just in case.
Okay.
Ordinance number -20-04, an ordinance of the City of St. Augustine Beach, Florida, amending the land development codes of the city as contained within Article 5, relating to resource protection standards, establishing Section 5.06.00, protection of dune system by preventing the modification of undisturbed areas of the dune system, providing for severability, providing for codification, and providing for an effective date.
Before I ask for a second, legal, I know that you normally would read, in our past procedures, you would normally read the ordinance. We're moving kind of fast tonight. Do you have any comments on this?
No, Mayor.
Okay, all right. So I'll call for a second on the motion.
Second.
All right, would you call the roll, please, Dariana?
Vice Mayor Kostka?
Yes.
Commissioner George?
Yes.
Commissioner Samora?
Yes.
Commissioner Romrell?
Yes.
Mayor England?
Yes.
Motion passes unanimously.
All right.
Just for clarification, so we can get this right, it's going to be permitted approved dune walkovers, right? That's the language we're changing it to?
Yeah, yes.
Okay, yes, ma'am, thank you.
Well, the language that we used, that Mayor
That
England
was in the
suggested-
motion.
that was in
Use the
motion that
language
said-
in the motion.
Yeah, that was simply approved. So did
Okay.
you want to change to approved?
Whatever was in the motion, the language used that was in the motion is the language we'll use.
Okay, the language that was in the motion was to insert approved before dune walkovers.
Okay. All right, now, we have a presentation from Mr. Tredick, Public Works.
No, not yet. This ordinance 20-06 isn't.
Yep.
You are presenting it, however.
I am, but I don't have a present. Well, okay, fine. Never mind. I'm going to try to do it with this thing on my face, so we'll see how that goes. I'm not going to try to read the ordinance, so I'll let them do that because I'll run out of air
Okay.
with this mask on.
All right.
Ordinance 20-6, this is the second reading of this ordinance, which is public hearing and second reading, providing for local implementation of the water conservation rule for landscape irrigation of the St. Johns River Water Management District. As I talked about during the first reading, the St. Johns River Water Management District has watering restrictions district-wide to ensure the efficient use of water for landscaping. The district encourages local governments to assist in enforcing their irrigation schedule through the adoption of local ordinances. And there are currently 69 cities and counties around the state, or around the district, that do that. This item was read on first reading on March 2nd, 2020. The commission had a couple of comments about it, one relating to Homeowners Association irrigation schedules, and the other for exemption for new technologies. I met with the Water Management District and discussed these two items, and we feel that the current ordinance as it's written covers these items, and it's detailed in this memo. I can go through it if you'd like. Basically, with homeowners associations, it's hard to breathe through this. The Water Management District has no objections to homeowners associations having different schedule than the standard schedule, as long as no zone is irrigated beyond what their requirements are. That's twice a week during the summer and once a week during the winter. So that's already covered in the ordinance in section 6, so that issue's covered. As far as new technologies, section 4 of ordinance 20-6 includes specific language for exemptions associated with improved new technologies, microspray, microjet, drip or bubblers to reduce water use. So that's also covered. One change that's happened since the first reading is the penalties. The first time around, it said fine not to exceed $500. It was kind of vague, not really clear what that second penalty would be. So we changed it to just a $100 flat $100 fee for subsequent violations. And that's the only changes. Would recommend today that we pass ordinance 20-06. One other thing I wanted to point out is hopefully once it's adopted, it will give us additional points in the district cost share program. Now, we were fortunate we didn't need them this last time. We managed to get it without them, but future projects, and I intend to apply for more projects, definitely those extra 5 points might make a difference. So with that, I would recommend that we approve this on second reading. And there's no way I'm going to do this next item.
Is there any public comment on this ordinance?
No, ma'am.
All right, well then, Commissioners, Vice Mayor, any questions?
No, ma'am.
None here?
Commissioner George?
No, thank you, Mayor.
Commissioner Romrell?
No, thank you, Mayor.
All right, then we are ready to read the ordinance.
Okay. Ordinance number 20-06, an ordinance of the City of St. Augustine Beach, Florida, providing for local implementation of the water conservation rule for landscape irrigation of the St. Johns River Water Management District, providing definitions, providing landscape irrigation schedules, providing exceptions to the landscape irrigation schedules, providing for variances from the specific day of the week limitations, providing for applicability of the ordinance, providing for enforcement of the ordinance, providing for penalties for violation of the ordinance, providing for codification, providing for repeal of all conflicting ordinances, providing for severability, and providing an effective date.
Thank you. So I will entertain a motion to approve ordinance number 20-06.
I'll make a motion to approve ordinance 20-06.
I will second it. Roll call vote, please.
Commissioner George?
Yes.
Commissioner Samora?
Yes.
Commissioner Romrell?
Yes.
Mayor England?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Kostka?
Yes.
Motion passes unanimously.
Mayor, excuse me.
Yes, ma'am.
I'm sorry to interrupt. Before we proceed to the next item, there was a bit of a delay at the end of the vote on the ordinance related to the Dune walkover. And I was a little concerned about, I thought that the motion that was made actually included the word permitted. Does no one think that's a problem?
I agree with you. I thought the
Section or-
language you used was permitted. So,
I believe Dariana said she read, or she recorded the motion
Approved.
as using the word approved.
That is correct. Was there two? I
I
only
thought
heard
it
one.
had been changed to permitted.
Okay, Mr. Law is saying that he heard two different people give motions. I only heard one, and I think that's where the conflict is coming in.
It actually started out as approved, then you said permitted, then it kind of just went between.
I did use the word approved, but then the actual motion from Commissioner George used the word permitted, and that should be the language we use in the ordinance.
Okay, so then it would state, to approve ordinance 20-04, inserting permitted and approved before Dune walkovers. Is that correct?
No, just permitted.
I had only said permitted.
Okay.
That's correct.
If it- So is the whole commission in consensus then, in agreement that it's just permitted Dune walkovers? Excuse me.
Everyone is shaking their head yes.
Okay, great, thanks. I just wanted to clarify it for the record. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, the next item on the agenda is some consent items. A budget resolution 20-02. I think that's the only one.
Well, there's two resolutions, a budget resolution and a regular resolution.
Okay, so there's a budget resolution 20-02 and resolution 20-10.
And you can pass them in one motion and vote if you want.
So is there any public comment on these consent items?
No, ma'am.
Okay, so and is there any questions from the commissioners on either of these two consent items? Budget Resolution 20-02 and Resolution 20-10. Hearing none, I will ask for a motion to approve Resolution 20-02 and Resolution 20-10.
I will make a motion to approve the consent agenda items, Resolution 20-02 and Resolution 20-10.
Second.
I hear a second from Commissioner Romrell. Roll call vote, please.
Commissioner Samora?
Yes.
Commissioner Romrell?
Yes.
Mayor England?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Kostka?
Yes.
Commissioner George? Commissioner George?
No questions.
We're calling the roll call vote. Do you approve the consent agenda?
Yes.
All right, motion passes unanimously.
Thank you all. We are moving on to, I think, one of our last items, I believe, and this is the non-ad valorem assessment to pay cost on household waste. And Mr. Tredick, I think this is your presentation.
It is, thank you, Mayor. I just couldn't wear a mask for one this long. I was running out of air on a short one, so I didn't have a chance of surviving through it. Good evening, Bill Tredick, Public Works Director. I'm here to present item 7, non-ad valorem assessment for the collection and disposal of solid waste and recyclables. I just want to point out that this presentation was put on the website too, so that people could follow along. The slides are numbered. I'll mention the number before each slide so that if they're following along, they don't get lost. It's got a lot of detail on how the formulas came into being. If you want, I can go through as fast or as slowly through that as you want, or whatever you're comfortable with. And with that, I'll jump right in.
Let me say something to the commissioners on the phone. If you want to ask questions as he's presenting this, please feel free to speak up.
Now the slide's not advancing.
No,
I can do it here. I can just do it here, that's fine. I'll just do the keyboard, that's fine. No, that's fine. So slide number 2. Talk a little bit about the current non-ad valorem assessment. It was first levied in 2012. It's set at $74 per household per year. It hasn't been changed since its inception. It covers, that is, the only thing it pays for is disposal or a portion of disposal. So collection costs and the remainder of disposal costs are paid for from the general fund. In September 10th, 2019, the Commission passed a motion to move forward to increase the non-ad valorem tax for residential solid waste and disposal. Slide number 3 shows some of the times this has been discussed. We've had 6 months straight where we've talked about solid waste at the Commission meetings. And the ones that are in bold are the ones where you've talked about the non-ad valorem assessment. The shaded ones are the commercial, which we've already dealt with. So September, the motion to proceed with the non-ad valorem assessment. In October, the consensus to continue that procedure. In December, Resolution 1913 was passed with the intent to levy the assessment for collection and disposal of solid waste and recyclables, and copies of that resolution were sent to the tax collector, the property appraisers, and the Florida Department of Revenue. So that's where we've been. So where do we go from here? The next step, there's several next steps, but the one right in front of us is to set the ranges. Not set the assessment, but set the ranges for those assessments. And then we have to set a public hearing to pass a resolution adopting the non-ad valorem assessment rule. And then after that, and before we do that, we have to, 20 days prior to that, everyone in the city has to be notified that we're going to be doing that. So this original presentation talks about a May time frame, because it was originally we were going to do this in the beginning of April, but now we're looking at a June time frame for setting that meeting. And then into an interlocal agreement with the tax collector for the collection of that assessment, which has to be done by September. So we have time, but not a lot of time. We do need to make some decisions here. And the decision in front of us today is what are the ranges that we want to use. So to figure out the ranges, we have to figure out what it really costs. And in 2019, about a year ago, there was came in front of you that it costs $460 per residence. And the commission wanted staff to look a little closer at that, since the county rates are lower than that, the city of St. Augustine rates are lower than that. So we did a review of the FY 2019 cost to try to come up with a refinement of that. And that's what this slide is, this complicated little spreadsheet that I put together with Patty's help. I couldn't have done it without her numbers. Slide number 6 shows the Excel worksheet used to determine the actual FY19 costs for the 3 primary services. And really, it's just an analysis to determine the average annual cost for collection, disposal, and recycling, because the special assessment will have each of those 3 components, those 3 primary items. Slide 7. Okay, the box circled in red on this slide are the types of costs that we've identified. All the labor, disposal, and equipment and depreciation costs are shown in gray inside that box, and those are actual documented fiscal year 2019 costs. The indirect costs at the bottom in the gray column are calculated, and I'll show you how that was done on the next slide. Slide 8, in order to calculate these indirect costs, the total actual costs for legislative, executive finance administration were multiplied by a 9.5% multiplier, which represents an estimate, and it is an estimate, of the actual percentage of time allotted towards solid waste services. Now, this is not an exact number, it's an estimate, and it's certainly going to vary between different types of indirect categories. And there was some discussion at the commission whether these should even be included in the analysis when we come up with these rates. And I looked at it with and without. Without these indirect costs, the cost per year, the total cost per year per residence, no wonder, that's a tough sentence, would drop about $30 from $330, and I'll show you where we got to $330 to $300. So it's about a 10% of the overall cost. If we dropped that, though, if we didn't include that, if we took that full 30 out, it wouldn't capture the staff hours which go into the managing, billing, and collecting, and would thus really not accurately represent the cost of providing the service. So legislative and executive indirect costs are really a pretty small portion and don't really have that big of an impact. So what happens if you just remove the legislative and executive costs? It only comes down by about $8 a year. So it's really a pretty small portion. Now, this is just the legislative and executive portion, your time and executive portion, $8 a year. So it doesn't have a big impact. It could be in, it doesn't have to be in. It's not going to change it very much one way or the other. So for this analysis, we left it in since it was such a small portion. So slide number 9, it's necessary to approximate the commercial and residential percentages of these costs, because we have the total cost, but we have to break it down into what's residential, what's commercial. And there's a lot of different approaches for this. The simplest and likely probably the most accurate is to divide the number of commercial customers by the total number of customers. It's very simple, it's easy to do. It doesn't exactly capture the variation between commercial and residential, but it's pretty close. And residential and commercial waste are picked up in the same runs, so it's virtually impossible, certainly impractical, to differentiate between when we bring a truck in, how much of it was commercial, how much was residential. So in the interest of trying to keep it simple, not try to make something so complex that it costs more to implement it than it's worth, we just use that simple formula. The commercial percent is then multiplied by the total cost, which was to the left of it in gray, and that gives us the commercial, and then to the right of that red box is the residential, which is the remainder. And if there's too much here or you want me to clarify anything, just let me know, because I get confused going through it sometimes too. Slide 10, the percentage of public works time. It's not the same as the others. It's very different because what our public works crews spend on something, on collection versus disposal, varies, and it also varies between which employee it is. A typical run consists of a driver and 2 collectors, or throwers, or whatever you want to call them, the people in the back of the truck that are actually handling the refuse and putting it in the truck. This collection is completed once the loaded truck returns to the yard. The guys that are in the back of the truck, they're done with collection at that point, but the driver still has a lot of work to do. He's got to drive the truck to the disposal site, come back, clean the truck. So his day's not done. And when you do all the math and count the hours, which I did an analysis of the actual hours per day for all the different types of services, it comes out to 86% of staff time at Public Works is on collection and 14% is on disposal. So that breakdown, which is shown up above, is applied to those total costs to break down the residential versus the commercial percentage. So it got a little tricky because everything's a little different. You get into equipment and you can't use that same ratio. So what I used for equipment is mileage, mileage of the trucks, and that's what's in the red box at the top. Based on the mileage, 42% of the equipment time is for collection and 58% is for disposal. And again, those are multiplied by the cost to get the breakdown. I think I've forgotten to say a slide here, number here and there, but I'll say where I am now. Slide 12. Indirect costs are a little trickier to break down. As I said before, they vary, but also they're a small percentage. They're estimated by first calculating, what I did on this was estimate them by calculating the percentage of the disposal cost, the tipping fees, by the overall department cost. It's not exact, but it's close. It's important to represent, as I said, this represents less than 10% of the total cost, so it doesn't make a lot of sense to be more precise than you are accurate. Recycling costs are the actual costs paid to the contractor, so those are the easiest of all to determine. Slide 13. So this is what it all came out to. Collection, $162. Disposal, $125, and recycling, $43 per year, for a total of $330 is what I estimate the costs were in fiscal year 2019. Now in 2022, FY22, when this would come into play, into being, if it were adopted, considering some inflation, and we don't know what the pandemic's going to do to inflation rates, but this was a minor inflation rate that brought it up to $366 in FY 2022. So that takes us back to the ranges. We now have a better handle of what the costs are. So what ranges do we want to set? For slide 14, there's some factors to consider. Phased implementation. We don't know how fast you want to implement this, so we have to set the ranges in such a way that you, the commission, is comfortable starting at a low rate and gradually increasing it. Where do you want to start? Do you want to start where we are now? Do you want to start somewhere higher? You know, that's the question too. Will the ultimate assessment fully fund the costs? Well, $330 is a lot. It's more than the county's charging. So we have to consider that. Time frame for the full implementation. Do we do it over 5 years? Do we do it over 10 years? Do we do it over 3 years? More choices to make. And what's inflation going to be, which is a big unknown right now. With the situation right now, is just can't predict that with the expected unemployment. There's a lot of unknowns, but we have to try to create our ranges broad enough so that we can adapt to those. So what I would recommend, and you do pick the numbers that work for y'all. These are just my recommendations, but we know the cost now, so I would recommend we at least start at half of the cost now, and then work our way up at a rate that's comfortable to the taxpayers and the commission. That would be $68 for the residential collection, $89 for disposal, and this is where I go a little different. One thing we might want to start with the bottom is recommending starting at 0 for recycling, because there's a lot of unknowns in recycling right now. The contract with Advance runs out in 2 years, around the same time frame that this will come into being, not exactly, but close. Whether we bring it in-house, whether recycling even has a future, there's a lot of unknowns there. So I would recommend setting this range low so that you have that option to make decisions about how to choose what to do with recycling down the road. As far as the top of the ranges, I figured 2.5% inflation per year starting at 2022. Moving forward 5 years, and that's where these numbers of 153, 199, and 66. And we may never get there. These are just ranges. Anywhere in between that range, you can set that annually to be what rate you desire. So just putting that all on one page, I would recommend slide 16, the ranges of $68 to $153 per year, $89 to $199 a year for residential disposal, and $0 to $66 for recycling. If you want to set the ranges for those first two lower because of the current conditions, you have that option too. These are just the recommendations when I put these slides together. I threw a couple potential implementation schedules up here on slide number 17. And there are more options than I can count. You can change this table any way you see fit to try to phase it in. But I think it's important we look at options to phase it in such a way that it's not so burdensome to the taxpayer. This phase in, the top one, essentially starts at half of everything, right in the middle of the costs for everything, and over 5 years ramps it up to the full cost. So you can see it would start at $185 total per year the first year in FY 2022 and go up, and I haven't done the math to figure out, but up to $418 in year 5. Now, every year you don't have to go up that much, it's just, that's a potential. You can always deviate from this as you need to. The one on beneath that is a little less aggressive. It takes us more to what the rate the county is going to be charging in FY 26 is. So it starts again at half the rate and then increases over 5 years up to what we expect the county will be charging in FY 26. So those are just two. As I said, there's a lot more potential scenarios there to discuss. And ultimately, it's the one everyone needs to be comfortable with. So slide 18, if there's one thing that this current crisis has shown, it's really that it's critical that we diversify our revenue streams. You know, none of us know what the impact to our budget's going to be as we move into the next fiscal year. But the job losses around the country are pretty staggering. Businesses will come back, but how quickly? So we're very vulnerable to really struggling to fund solid waste if revenue streams decrease. This is a lot of people might say it's not a good time to do it. I say it's the exact time to do it. This is exactly why a situation like this, when an emergency comes up and all of a sudden we're in budget shortfalls, if you have dedicated revenue streams for certain critical services, they won't fail. They'll get done. So I think it's very important to flip that question of maybe not now to absolutely now. This is the time. And it's painful. I mean, it's never easy to raise fees on people, but I think this is a perfect example of why it's necessary. I think a phased implementation makes a whole lot of sense. It eases the pain. You bring it in at the rate that you and the citizens are comfortable with. But so those are my recommendations. In order to continue to move forward, we have to do a few things, which I have on the slide here. Authorize staff to continue to pursue implementation of a non-ad valorem assessment for solid waste collection, disposal, and recycling. We have to set that range for each service as specified, or a range that you're comfortable with. And I had mid-May here. It'll probably be more like June, but we do have to set a public hearing in June to formally begin the establishment of rates for the solid waste non-ad valorem assessment. And the reason it has to be June, again, is because we have to advertise to the city for 20 days in advance. So I'm happy to take any questions.
Mr. Tredick, we've already addressed the commercial solid waste pickup and disposal and increased those rates and cleared out commercial. Have we cleared out commercial customers yet that need to get private collection?
That will happen on October 1st. In fact, I have a draft letter that's going to go out to the businesses that are affected and the condos, and that's actually going to go out this week, that letter, notifying them of the October 1st deadline and giving them the name of the franchises in the city that are acceptable haulers so they can start pulling things together and be ready, and they don't have an interruption of service.
And when we complete that, do you anticipate that that will decrease or increase our overall costs for solid waste disposal and collection?
It will decrease our costs, but it will also decrease our revenue a little bit, so it will kind of decrease both slightly.
Net?
It's not a tremendous gain or loss one way or another. I think I went through the math in that presentation, and I don't have it committed to memory, but there was a small financial net benefit to doing that, but it wasn't great.
All right. And does this proposal, one of the things the commission, I recall the commission saying, we've got to make sure that a residence doesn't pay more in a non-ad valorem fee than a commercial customer.
That's correct. I remember that conversation, and they wouldn't in this case. If you start at half, again, I don't have the commercial committed to memory, but it was more. It was a couple hundred, $260 or something for one 64-gallon can. So that's where commercial's starting. Residential, if we start in a phased implementation, will start quite a bit lower than that. And depending where you end up, you don't have to go all the way up to the 414 or 415
Right, so
in
we
2026. You could stop at the commercial rate if you chose to.
Each year, we would reanalyze our cost and where we need to go,
Correct.
and make sure a residential customer doesn't pay more than commercial.
Absolutely.
Okay, all right. Any other questions, Vice Mayor?
Mr. Tredick, on page 13, the total average annual cost per residence, is that based on the residential total cost of $966, $662.25?
Go back to that slide because this is too small for me to read on my printout. Slide 13?
Yes, sir.
Okay, could you repeat that?
Sure. So you have in the bottom box, squared off, you have the total average annual cost per residence as $329.73. Is that based on the residential total cost of $966,662.25?
Trying to see where you see that number of 900. Oh, to the left of there, okay.
Yeah.
I believe so.
Yeah, I'm, if I follow your math correctly,
Yeah.
that's where it is. Okay, thank you.
Commissioner, some more questions?
First, incredibly impressed by the presentation. Wow, what a long way we've come from the information we were getting prior. This is very thoughtful, very thorough. You've explained everything very well. Just a couple of thoughts and observations. One, we started at the beginning of these discussions, the cost per, we thought our cost per resident was $460. It's down to $330 with a much more thorough analyzation of the costs. I believe that's going to continue to come down for different reasons, you know, as we get a better handle on our costs. So it's nice to see we're getting closer to what some of the other jurisdictions around us have established as their costs, so that's great. Let's see. Let me ask you this: why, in setting the ranges, you said a floor of 0 for the recycling, but not for the others. Can you explain your thought process there as to why you would be willing to set the base for recycling at 0, but not collection or disposal?
The reason I thought 0 for recycling, because there's been various talks about what we do when advanced contract expires in, I think, March or April 2022. One option would be we take it in-house. Another option is we change it or restructure it, decide whether or not we want to continue recycling all the products we do or change that. There was talk prior about going to toters versus the bins. So there's a lot of unknowns about what's going to happen in 2 years. If we do end up bringing it in-house, if we do end up not doing recycling, I mean, I don't know that that's what anyone wants, but if we end up not doing recycling, we certainly don't want to have our system set up so that we are charging for something we're not providing. So that would give us the option of lowering it to 0. You don't have to start there, but you could lower it to 0 without going through a change, and you just submit the new rate of 0 to the tax collector every year, because at that point you wouldn't be recycling. So it gives you the maximum flexibility. I don't think we'll ever have those same situations with collection and disposal of traditional solid waste, and I set it to half because it was a nice median benchmark to start at. It's not, set in stone. That was just a number I started with to try to get us moving in the right direction. If you feel comfortable with a lower starting point than that, that's certainly up to you.
Very good. So the only scenario we would have 0 cost would be no recycling program whatsoever.
Correct.
Okay. Thank you for that explanation.
Commissioner Romrell, do you have any questions for Mr. Tredick right now?
Actually, thank you, Mr. Tredick, for such a great detailed presentation. And I'm happy that we were able to find, a truer number of costs. The only questions I have for you, Mr. Tredick, is just looking at the two. Have we looked at the disposal being dropped off somewhere else? I know, like, for example, we found out that Advance is taking some of the recyclables and other places to other disposal sites where the tipping fees are a little bit less. And so therefore, if we can find out, does it behoove us to take our stuff down to DeLand or somewhere closer? I think they're down just outside of Flagler County or in Flagler and Bunnell, I think is where they're taking a lot of their stuff. Have we looked at that cost analysis as well? Is it cheaper for us in the long run to have a little wear and tear on the vehicles or to drop it off at a different location? So that's a question I have. And then, I would love to figure out how, if we continue recycling, depending on what the climate is, depending on what stuff is now considered recyclable, what's not recyclable, I think there's going to be a lot of changes in the next couple years. I'd love for us to take that back over and not sub that out, because that's going to save us an additional another $140,000, because I believe we can do that cheaper. And so those are the kind of the questions I have looking at it. But just looking at the raw numbers, I'm more inclined to look at the second part of it, where the increases are a lot less than I am at the first part.
Yeah, that's a great question, and we are absolutely exploring other options for disposal. We did a little research and have contacted and reached out to the place in Bunnell that the city of St. Augustine is taking their material. The benefit of using that would be mostly on the recycling side. There's not a lot of benefit financially on the traditional garbage disposal side, but the recycling price was roughly half down there of what it is at places up that Advance is taking it. So we are looking at that. Again, with the phased implementation, we're not going to get anywhere near the costs right away. Excuse me. So we do have some time to really refine that, and I had planned over the next year to start opening up those discussions with the place in Bunnell, seeing if that's an option for recycling if we choose to take it in-house in the future, but also what the options are for garbage and other white goods and yard waste and things like that. So we're absolutely looking at ways to save on that. And so, they can be done hand in hand, starting at a modest rate, increasing it gradually, and then bringing the cost down at the same time.
That would be great, because I think that, I think I'd be comfortable for the taxpayers to see that, hey, yes, we're raising rates to some degree, but we're also trying to figure out how to lower costs, so maybe the rate increase year over year will be less. And so I think as long as we continue to do our homework, I think that our constituents will be understanding that, hey, look, cost goes up. I mean, you go to a store and a carton of eggs is more expensive than, it was 10 years ago. So I think as long as we follow the same guidelines and working with it, I'm comfortable with really looking at this, because we are going to need to close the gap on a lot of the things that we're doing. And I appreciate you putting this detailed, and for Patty as well, working on this together to really make this a really first-class presentation. So thank you.
Thank you.
Commissioner George, your questions?
Thank you, Mayor. And thank you, Bill. This is a great analysis. Bill and Patty, thank you both. I'm really glad we got these numbers squared away. I don't have any questions on the presentation. I think it was, very thorough, and the numbers make sense. So I for one would like to hold the cost, the lower up to the 50%. The second option that was presented, I think that's, I think it's better for our residents. So.
Yeah, and I will point out, I just showed them for purposes of what it could be. Today, we're just setting the ranges. So we can discuss what that implementation schedule, if you're comfortable with that, we can move forward with preparing it that way, or if you want to do something different, we can do that too.
But for tonight, you need us to approve you moving forward and approve ranges.
Correct.
And then we will continue to work on reducing cost and increasing the charge so we're not subsidizing as much.
Yes.
Correct.
And if we can set a meeting Now, I don't know if that can be done at the June commission meeting, or,
Yes, we'll work on setting that up.
okay.
Okay.
We also have public comment, but
Right.
I would also like to request you to take a look at a schedule based on mills. If you take a look at the tax bill that we have right now, we have 0.5 mills set aside for the bond, which this year, or I believe last year, supplied $610,333.93 to our budget. Now, using that formulation and the number of $966,662 of required cost of trash, it would be, if we're using the same parameters, the mills, total mills for that would be 0.8, which is extraordinary. However, the purpose of this is to make sure that we're covering our costs, correct? And to bill the residents that are using the service, right? So I also believe that, like what we talked about during our commercial discussion, that we were charging the commercial customers by the size can and how many cans, that we need to apply the same thought process as we continue forward in charging for residential pickup. And so, as you know, I'm opposed to the one-size-fits-all, because a family of one does not generate the same amount of trash as a family of 6 or 4. And so, therefore, it seems to make sense to me to approach it in this way. And this also has a built-in factor of something that was mentioned in your presentation about the annual increase in costs that there is. Well, there's also an increase in property values every year. So it would kind of be a situation where the increase in costs would take care of itself by the increase in property values, regardless of what, like 0.5 mils is going to be different next year than it is this year because of the increase in property value. So I would just like to, side investigation, if you could look into a little bit of that and what that would look like.
Yeah, I'll talk to Patty about that and see how we can address that. It being non-ad valorem, it's going to be a flat fee of some sort. So I don't know how that could be structured to have it vary based on something like square footage or something like that. So that's something we can investigate. I don't have an answer for you, but we'll look into it.
Okay, thank you.
You might check some of our previous minutes. I'm sure we've had a few discussions about this, because I do believe we've discussed it a little bit at least, maybe not to the detail you're asking now, but there might be something in the minutes on why we have decided to move forward with a non-ad valorem fee rather than the ad valorem charge. There might be something there that might be helpful to remind us of.
Okay.
I think I've given each commissioner an opportunity to ask questions, so we're ready for public comment.
Mr. Tom Reynolds.
Tom Reynolds, 50 Brigantine Court. I urge the commission to charge cost. See, commissioners, I know it's really hard. I'm a fiscal conservative, and obviously none of you are. I believe users pay users cost. Obviously none of you have ever heard of that, because you've been subsidizing out of the general fund. I'm a victim of that. I lived at Ocean Racket, and I live at Seaside Villas. And what do? Well, I'm a renter, I make a payment, and they pay into the general fund. And what is it? This commission is taking the money out of the general fund to subsidize the waste disposal. How many condo owners are you cheating? over 1,000. I found another complex that is using private trash. All of them pay in to the general fund, all of them are cheated. Not once in 4 years has one commissioner ever brought that up. Somehow, this commission thinks it's okay to cheat other people. Well, thou shalt not steal. Thou shalt not what? To thy neighbor? See, commissioners, that's the trouble with an unholy city. But you don't understand these things. You're stealing from the condo owners to subsidize the trash. Oh, I shouldn't have mentioned that word subsidy because, as Maggie Kostka told Margaret England before, don't use that word subsidy because it's in the charter. We can't subsidize anything. So, because Margaret England said the truth, Maggie had to correct her. Don't use that. Why must this commission continue to subsidize the trash and cheat the condo owners? It'd be different if you were sending them a check. We got a check from you, and you were giving us some money because we use private sector trash pickup. We're punished. Once again, been going on since Joe Howe was alive. He was here, he did his work. Melissa Burns did her job. Now we've come up with this lower figure, and anything less than charging user cost, is fiscally irresponsible. It's that simple. So tonight, you have a chance to correct the wrongs. Stop stealing from the condo owners of St. Augustine Beach. Anything less, you're going to be what? What do we call people that steal? We call them thieves. Thank you. I've been waiting 4 years for this. 4 years.
All right, commissioners, I think we're ready to hear if someone is, any further discussion on, because what we have to do tonight is give direction to the Public Works Department and Mr. Tredick about going forward, and to set all we have to do is give him direction on setting the range for him to go forward. Is this correct, Mr. Tredick?
Yes, you need to set the range.
Okay.
I don't know if that needs to be by motion or just consensus. Is that?
I think we just need to give direction.
Mayor, also, I'd just like to make a brief comment. We've spent a lot of time on this over the last couple of years. We've already made the policy decisions. I haven't agreed with every step of them, but I think that they were thoughtfully made. Those policy decisions included calculating on a per unit basis the residential cost and calculating on a per usage basis the commercial cost. So just in response to some of the comments that were made, I just want to make it clear that we have carefully considered trying to integrate a system that would be based upon use and consumption, but also something fair. And we really drew that line down the type, residential versus commercial. So, I think we've all done a good job. Like I said, I don't agree necessarily with every decision we've made on this, but I think, we deserve the credit of having spent a lot of time on it and making good decisions, really, in the end, trying to balance all of the concerns. Also, I would like to get a little input from our city manager on the proposals that have been presented. So, Max, would you mind just kind of weighing in on, we set the policy, but you've been here a long time. This is a really big policy change, That was the initial fight is, do we continue to pay out of our general fund or?
Max, do you mind coming up so they can hear you a little bit better?
I think Well, I think the mayor got frozen out for a moment. I mean, Commissioner George. My thoughts. It's a step in the right direction, because clearly we are at a point where we see where you have one significant revenue source, ad valorem taxes, that you control. The other sources are much lower in amount. They are set by state law, are capped by state law. We are facing a definite possible downturn in revenue from those sources, and we have no other significant sources other than ad valorem, state revenue sharing, half-cent sales tax, et cetera. We certainly aren't going to issue parking tickets just to make revenue. That would be silly, and I think very offensive to our citizens and our visitors. So I really think Mr. Tredick has hit the nail on the head at this point, that we really need to at least move forward on this one step. This is not the final step. You have second thoughts, you have a chance to change your mind if you want. But I would recommend highly we move forward on this intermediate step, so that at least we set a public hearing at some point, and I'll coordinate dates with you as to when all of you will be available. And possibly by that point, all this restriction will be away, and we won't have to worry about having people having to wait out there to comment. As I recall, quite a while ago, when we set the ad valorem for, the non-ad valorem for disposal, we sent out a notice to every residence in the city. And we didn't have that amount of, we didn't have people with torches and pitchforks at City Hall here saying, what are you doing to us? I think it was remarkably well received. This is, of course, a different time, different amounts of money. We'll see how they would react then. At that point, you could decide you don't want to proceed further with it, or and we'll have more up-to-date information for you in light of what the vice mayor's asked for. And if you have any ideas as to information you want, we certainly can provide it to help you make a decision as to proceed. And again, this will occur in FY, a fiscal year, not 21, but 22. Because it's not like it's going to happen next October.
Any further questions, Commissioner George, or do you have any other questions?
Thank you. No, not about the residential. But I do think it's important that, if we're going to create a high range, that we not exceed the county level. I think that's important.
So you're suggesting a range of, I think what Mr. Tredick said, it ranged from 157 to 418, and you're saying 157 to 222? Could you hear my question back to you, Commissioner George?
Yeah. Yes, that's correct. So that, I believe he had projected it at 250 by the time 2026 would come around.
So let me make sure I understand. Give me your suggested range. For tonight, we need to set a very low and the top end of the range. We can actually charge more or less when we actually start charging, but tonight is just setting the range, the bottom of the range and the top of the range. Tell me what you would are suggesting for that range, not the actual charge. That'll be decided later.
Yes, of course, we have the ability to create a different table, but he's got a range in here of 185 to 250. I guess that's over years.
No, the range that would go to the tax collector would be, and which gives us an opportunity to set a different schedule for the actual charge. The range that Mr. Tredick has in our book on page 6 is 157 for the bottom and 418 for the top.
Right.
It's, and that's all we need to give direction to or
Right, but what I'm saying is Yes, I don't think that the top should exceed what the county residents are paying. I don't think that the maximum should exceed what the county residents are paying.
If I may.
Yes, please, Mr. Tredick, I'm not.
So the ranges aren't what's going to be implemented. What's going to be implemented will be somewhere within those ranges. So if the city decides to implement that bottom table on slide 17, the only important thing is that the top ranges are above what our top ends up being. It really, the purpose of the higher ranges is to account for inflation, to account for unknowns, so that we're not back here reestablishing ranges and writing new laws. It's so that this non-ad valorem assessment can see us well into the future with unknowns. I really don't see us going, I mean, I expect we won't go higher. I mean, I don't know what your choices will be, but I would expect you'll probably want to do the lower table, which is takes it up to the county rate after 5 years, or maybe something less, I don't know. But having that higher range really protects you from the unknown. You're not going to be setting it above that range, so if something comes up and the price dramatically increases, we would have to go through this process again to charge more. So that would be my only caution about bringing the ranges down to match what we think, or exactly match what you might want to implement. I would say set the range big and implement small. That's probably.
I totally, I mean, I understand, but we are levying a huge change for our residents. I mean, this is going to impact some people's fixed incomes and fixed budgets very badly. I'm still worried about the elderly. I don't, we those over time cautiously anyway, and I think that the review would be worthwhile to engage in again.
Commissioner George, I'm going to ask for comments from the other commissioners, and I'll come back to you after you hear their comments, okay? Commissioner Romrell, range.
The range, I think, if you're looking at it based on the two slides, the first slide, or the first range, I wouldn't want to go any higher than what the first number is on that slide. And so that would be, looking at it now, that would be, 185, 227, 278, 341, 418. And then the low range being, that bottom slide. That's kind of where my head is. I'm kind of under the same feeling as Commissioner George, where, I think people are going to be shocked by doubling it to begin with, but I think there's a reason for it. I think there's a need for it because it's a service, and that service costs money. But I don't want to exceed higher than that first slide, if that makes sense, Mayor.
Commissioner Romrell, if you look on page 6, and that's the chart I would like everybody to focus on, that one, because what we may actually charge in fiscal year 22 and beyond that can be completely different than the charts on page 7, and hopefully a lot less. But for purposes of sending a range to the tax collector, please concentrate on the chart on page 6 and give me a bottom range and a top, and if you have an objection to the top range of 418, give me your suggestion.
Yeah, I mean, I'm looking here at slide number 6 in the presentation, as you asked.
I'm talking about page 6 in the book.
16 of the presentation.
Okay, 16 in the presentation, thank you.
I can bring it back up on here.
Okay.
There we go. Yeah. So let me go to 16 here then, because I have that pulled up right now. You know, the top range, you know, you're looking, you know, I wouldn't want to go, you know, if you're looking at residential collection, I think if we're looking at it, I like the 68, 89, 28 as your low range. And then your top range, you know, being the, you know, maybe the 102, 133, 43. So if you're looking at the slide, Mayor, if you look at slide 17, what I did was I took the top, the 102, 133, 43, which brings it to, which is more than the 79, 103, 33. Does that make sense?
Can you give us the number that Mr. Tredick has suggested for a top range is $418, and I'm hearing some trepidation on that figure from both Commissioner George and you. So what would be your alternative top range for the total of the ad valorem charge that we would be working under? This would, before we have to go back to the tax collector and ask for more money.
I would say the top range is the number that he gave us, which is the total amount is $329.73. Because that's what our cost is based on the number that we came to, or that he came to.
Okay, so that's a good suggestion, is our top range would be our cost today, current cost.
And that's what this table shows. Those are
Yeah, what the table
anticipated.
shows is $329.73 on slide 13. If that's what our cost is, then that's what I want. I wouldn't want it to exceed what that cost is.
The only thing I would remind is that the top cost considers inflation over 7 years, because it's just not going to happen until 2022, and it will end in 2026, or not end, but the top year. So where we'll be in 2026, FY26 will probably be considerably higher than what our cost is today. I mean, I don't know that, but I'm just anticipating inflation acting on our costs.
And maybe, Mayor, maybe we have to revisit that, because if there's also the cost of the recycling goes down, if the cost of disposal with the tipping fees go down, I think, you know, it's hard to give that estimate, from my opinion, because I understand the concern of getting to a top dollar, but I also want to understand that that top dollar can always change.
Okay.
And so, you know, based on the numbers I have in front of me, I feel that if the cost is $329 today, $20.73, then maybe in 5 years it may be $400. So maybe $400 is the magic number, that it doesn't exceed $400 in that number.
Okay, I just want everyone to understand that this range that Mr. Tredick is asking for now is a range we will give to the tax collector. And it is going to be our range, and if we want to increase the top of the range, and that's what Mr. Tredick is saying, if we find ourselves, say we take on recycling and we want, and there's inflation, or there's additional cost, or we need a new truck, we will have to go back and go through this process and increase that range with the tax collector. It has nothing to do with the actual charge we may do, but we would have to go through the process again. So, but that's fine. I mean, if you all want to decrease the top of the range to something less than $418, I think we should do that by consensus. So, and I'll come back to everybody. So, Commissioner Samora, what do you think about the top range?
I have a couple questions, actually.
Okay,
Not
good.
to answer a question with a question, but
Okay.
in order to go back and set the range, to adjust the range at a later date, what is the process? It is, just explain that again, Bill. This is, I think, notifying all residents again, having a couple of public hearings, is that correct?
Again, I'm not, unfortunately, an
Or Max
expert
may be a
on that.
better
but
person to
I believe
answer
we
that.
would be going through a lot of this process again, but.
Max, what would be the process to adjust the range 2 years from now, if we needed to?
Just exactly what you're going through today.
Well, this is a discussion, but then what else would we have to do? As far as public notifications?
Yes,
and
we'd have to send out a notice to every residential property owner in the city, notifying them of the proposed new charge.
Okay. Okay. So if we do have to come back at a later date, it's not just us having a meeting and deciding amongst ourselves and notifying the tax collector. It's 2 or 3 meetings, sending out notifications. I just wanted to make sure I was clear on what the process would be if we had to adjust it. So I think it is probably better to go to the high side, in my opinion. The other question I have for Mr. Tredick or Mr. Royal, whoever is best equipped to answer, are we setting one range today, or are we setting 3 distinct ranges? One for collection, one for disposal, one for recycling?
3 distinct ranges.
3 distinct ranges, okay. So we have to think about that. My opinion now, to get back to maybe the mayor's question, I'm actually comfortable going lower on the low side of the ranges. I've got some concerns with the implementation timetable, and just doing some quick math, if we wanted to break this up over maybe 5 years, one of the approaches I would like to see actually brings us in lower than the 185 or what's proposed. So I'd like to see some of the ranges move down on the lower side, and I'm comfortable anywhere on the high side of the overall range, anywhere between our current cost today of $330 and our projected of $418. I don't believe we should go lower than anything that totals up to $330, which is our current cost, and I like the protection on the high side, but I am cautious due to this is a big change, and some of Commissioner George's concerns of it's a big change for the public, and there's going to be a perception of, wow, they're going to hit us with $400 out of the gate. Not everyone listens to our discussions and our intent. So I'm a little cautious to go to the high side, but I wouldn't go any lower on the high side than $330. To give a little bit more direction on the distinct ranges, I would say, got so many notes over here, it's tough to keep up. On the residential collection side, on the low side, maybe we bring it down to $50, and the disposal side to $75, and leave the recycling where you've got it at 0 just in case. That would give us a low side of 125 total.
Okay.
On the high side, I haven't done the math to see how that breaks out, but it would be, let's see, trying to come up somewhere in between the 330 and the 418, roughly 150 on the residential collection, 199, 200, let's call it, for the disposal, and let's say another, 50 for the recycling. What's that get us? 400.
400. So that gives us a range of 125 to 400.
Right.
For the tax collector range purpose.
If I could I get Commissioner Samora the low side numbers again?
Yes, it was 50 on the residential collection and 75 on the disposal.
Okay.
And 0 for the recycling.
Thank you.
Having heard that, Commissioner George, your further comments? While we get Commissioner George back.
She's on there.
She is?
That's not, yeah, she seems to be having a latency issue. Russell and I both independently checked our latency. We're at 15 milliseconds, which is ridiculously low. It's not on our end. And we just heard from Commissioner Romrell, but it looks like Commissioner George is back.
Commissioner George, I hope you heard some new suggested ranges. On the low side, $125, and on the high side, $400 from Commissioner Samora. How do you feel about those?
Yeah, I heard all of those. I like the low range of 125. I followed his breakdown of each of those categories. I'm in agreement on those. Again, I'm hesitant to go up as high as 400. I understand that this is still a projection for the future, and so the 400 wouldn't necessarily relate to now. But again, I think that there should be some subsidy from the city. I just do on this. I think that we should not be going up that quickly over the course of a 5-year time frame.
Okay, Commissioner Romrell, second thoughts.
Yeah, I feel pretty good with Commissioner Samora's low range of the 125, and I understand the high range. I know we don't have to accept it, and nor would, I don't think any of us, not speaking for any of us, but I don't think any of us would accept the high range at this point. But I get the reasoning for it, so I'm okay on his numbers. The only thing I have a comment on, Mayor, is I think we need to have some sort of number for recycling, because I think we're going to have to, it's going to cost us, even if it's $10 or $5, there's got to be a number there. I'm just a little hesitant to mark that as a 0, only because that's going to be an unknown. And so, you know, if we're talking ranges and we're doing it, if we can get to the 125 but add a little bit into that number for recycling, I'd feel comfortable with that. So whether you take $10 off the low number of the residential collection number and then throw it into the recycling, but I'd like to see a number in recycling, because I think 0, if it's continued, is an unrealistic number.
Mr. Tredick,
The reason it was 0 is in case the commission ever decides to not recycle. If that is off the table, then absolutely, it doesn't need to be at 0.
we never know. I don't think recycling is ever off the table. It may be different, but, okay. But Commissioner Romrell, you are okay with the 125?
I'm okay with the 125. I just think we need to put something in there to show a recycling cost. I don't, how we manipulate that number, I just don't want that to show as a 0, because I think there's going to be a cost to it.
But that doesn't mean that we can't charge for recycling no matter what. That's just the minimum range, the bottom of the range. We can charge for recycling.
I'm okay with that number. Yes, ma'am. Yes, Mayor.
Okay, all right. Vice Mayor, second thoughts? Anything you want to add, even though you want to do something different?
I understand, and I just for comparison purposes, I think it would be interesting to take a look at. However, getting back to the task at hand, Mr. Tredick, could you explain for me, please, the implementation schedule for anticipated St. Johns County fees? Is that based on their current fees, their projected fees? Where are those numbers coming from? And why is the end of fiscal year 26 so different?
I have their current fee, I believe it's $230, and they're, if I'm not mistaken, they're allowed to increase it by CPI each year. I don't know what their maximum range is, but I used a minimal inflationary cost to get to the $250 in 26.
Well, I do share.
It will be that, exactly.
Thank you. I do share Commissioner George's concern over, will there become a point where our citizens are paying more than St. Johns County citizens for trash collection? When in people's minds, it's just trash collection. But I understand, I certainly understand, and thank you for all of the documentation and work that you and Patty have done on detailing the costs and what is all entailed in the costs. But for explanation purposes, how do we explain to people that it's going to cost them more to pick up their garbage here than it does outside of the city?
Well, I know that we do things that the county doesn't do. I believe our service is higher. And I'll give you an example. Just recently, we had complaints about some of the county garbage cans not being picked up down by the beach. they're not our cans, but we're making sure all of our public cans, all of our, because it's not, it's garbage for the whole city. We have all the mutt mitts, all sorts of things are covered through solid waste. So I do believe we have a higher level of service to our citizens. I think that's part of it. I do think there are some savings that can be found. I absolutely think that, so.
If we can just halt for a moment, it is 9:30, so we need a motion to extend the meeting.
Make a motion to extend the meeting to 10 o'clock.
I'll second that.
We'll need a roll call.
Commissioner Romrell,
Yes.
England,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Kostka,
Yes.
Commissioner George,
Yes.
Commissioner Samora.
Yes.
Motion passed unanimously. Motion is extended to 10 p.m.
So I expect we'll be able to bring those costs down a little bit more. I don't know how much. There's so many unknowns right now that I'm a little hesitant to take a guess at where we're going to be a year or two from now. But I suspect if we land in a place where we started, then we should be able to bring costs down a little more. I just don't know how likely that is right now.
Yes, we are living in a state of uncertainty for sure. I think that we're all going to be tasked with looking at ways to cut costs and use our resources to the best of our abilities. That being said, then I'm comfortable with the suggestion that Commissioner Samora gave on the range.
May I, Mr. Tredick mentioned something, and I'm not sure if I misinterpreted. Can this rate be submitted to the tax collector with an incremental, like a CPI increase annually, so that we could go in with this is our cost today, but we want to be able to increase it?
I don't know. I think that's their ordinance that allows them to do that. I don't know the details of it. I can get that for you. I believe that we are going to be living within this range unless we modify the range. That's my understanding of the system.
Okay.
So I think it might be their ordinance that allows them to increase it.
Check into that. I mean, and I'm hearing concern. I'm hearing concern from Vice Mayor Kostka and Commissioner George and even Commissioner Romrell about the high end and the visit.
All right, let me make a suggestion because this range will go out to the public. Is that correct, Max? Yes. All right, so perception, instead of a $400 figure, our current cost is $330. So if the range is $125 to $375, for perception purposes, you've got it under $400. That might be a figure that will get somebody's attention. So let me suggest for compromise $125 to $375, and we really are going to try to bring those costs down where we never reach $375. We're going to try and bring our costs down. So, Commissioner George, $125 to $375.
So I may on principle just vote against it anyway. Mayor, why don't you? That may sound obnoxious, but, how long is this ordinance going to be good for? And also, what about the, the suggestion of a 0 on the recycling? Shouldn't we have a 0 on the other categories also? Shouldn't our floor be 0? What if a future commission decides they don't want to be implementing this in the future? Will they have to go through this process to revoke it if we don't have the 0? And remember, in 5 years, we don't know who's going to be on the commission. I know that there was some statements earlier that none of us will likely want to use that 400 or 375, but we don't know who's going to be on the commission. We have to make decisions for the structure, not based upon who we are now. So again, I'm really just an advocate for not exceeding whatever the 5-year projection is on the county rate, which is a $250 figure. I can be outnumbered and outvoted. That's fine, but that's my last pitch, I guess.
Okay, so your last is 250. All right, Commissioner Rumwell, 125 to 375.
I'm okay with the 125 to 375 because I don't expect us to ever vote on the 375.
Commissioner Samora?
Yes, I just can't justify maxing out at what's under our known costs today at with 250 being under 330. So yes, I'm fine with your suggestion.
Okay, and so that's, and I don't know, we're supposed to be giving direction. I don't know that we need a motion and a vote. I may turn to legal for that.
I would recommend going ahead and put it in the form of a motion, and that direct staff to bring this up at the June meeting.
All right.
Quick question, Mayor, where would, if you could decide where that 25 comes from, whether it's from collection or disposal, when you went from 400, Commissioner Samora's proposal of 400?
Let me make the recommendation that it comes from collection. So are you ready for a motion? Were you calling for one? Did we have anything else procedurally?
We need to, I'm ready to move on.
Okay, I would like to make a motion to set the ranges for residential solid waste services as follows. Residential collection. You ready, Bill?
Only thing I would say is if you take, I'm currently showing a cost of 100 and, trying to see for the collection, it's 68 times 2, 100. I have to find that slide. I would just recommend that you don't set the range below the current. I think that's what you said.
That's exactly what I was doing. The current range, the current $74 is for disposal, correct?
Yeah, I thought you meant the current cost as calculated for.
Current cost is calculated.
For collection. And I have to find it 68 times 2, whatever that is, 100.
I was just looking at your FY '26 projection was at 153, so I was going to bring.
While he's looking for that number.
As far as the maximum, I'm saying.
Right.
136 was the
So
collection, and disposal would be the delta on that.
let me go with this, and let me know if we can discuss, I guess, after the motion's out there, if it gets a second. So setting the rates for residential service as follows: residential collection from 50 to 150, a minimum of $50, a maximum of $150. Residential disposal, a minimum of $75, a maximum of $175.
Yeah, that works with the math.
That sound right, Bill? Yes. And residential recycling, a minimum of 0 and a maximum of 50.
That ends up to 375.
That sets an overall range with a low side of $125 and a maximum of
375.
$375.
Before there's a second, do you intend to add to your motion to direct staff to plan for a public hearing in June?
And the motion would also direct the staff to set a public hearing in June.
I'll second that motion. Roll call, please.
That was to set a public hearing in June. Okay. Mayor England?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Kostka?
No.
Commissioner George?
No.
Commissioner Samora?
Yes.
Commissioner Romrell?
Yes.
Vote is 3-2, motion passes.
Thank you all. It was a good discussion, and I really appreciated all of the different ideas and the input. All right, I believe we are done with our agenda items. No?
No, transferring of money.
Agenda item number 8, transferring money in the annual budget, review of auditor's recommendation. to change sections 2-103 and 2-104 of the General City Code. Those sections now require that any transfers between accounts in a single department budget of greater than $1,500 have to come to you as a budget resolution for you to approve. I am allowed to transfer between $500 and $1,500 on my own. The auditor recommended that that be changed to reflect that the amounts of $1,500 was set many years ago, and it should be higher now. And if you would agree, then we would need an ordinance that would amend the two sections.
So the last sentence here is to recommend that come to the commission for transfers in excess of 15,000.
Yes.
That 1,500.
No.
Transfers over 1,500 would need to come before the commission with a resolution.
No, that's what it does now. That's what we're trying to change.
So again, we are at a point of the commission suggesting a figure.
Yes, it could be 10,000, or it could be 5,000. The sentence I wrote was, you could require the city manager to report to you transfers in excess of 15,000, 20, and 25,000, or a higher amount. You could also set a lower amount. The purpose of this is really to diminish some of the paperwork that you have to deal with, meeting to meeting to meeting.
Okay.
And that the fact the $1,500 that were set back in 1991, no, 1992, I believe.
Is there a figure that one of the commissioners has been thinking of that you would like to be first to suggest?
Mayor, I'll suggest 15,000. I just want to, just clarify again, this is not for expenditures, this is only for transfers. And it doesn't, I don't believe that it changes any of the purchasing policies, so I don't have a problem with 15,000 or 20,000.
No, it wouldn't change the purchasing policies. The money would have to be already appropriated in the budget. I couldn't transfer money from a reserve, for example, without your approval. That would have to come to you.
Okay. And so, Commissioner Romrell, 15 or 20,000, what are you most comfortable with?
I'm fine with either one. I think that's fine.
Vice Mayor, 15 or 20?
Well, I would suggest either 10 or 15, so I guess I'll go with 15.
And Commissioner Samora?
And just a clarification, because there are two different parts to this. One is moving money inside of a department's budget from one account to another, and then the other was that currently any transfer of any amount between departments needs a resolution. So are you suggesting that this, what we're going to be putting together will apply to both of those scenarios?
Transfers of, I can't say it's unlikely would happen within a department, but yes, transfers either between departments or within departments.
Okay. I'm in line with Vice Mayor Kostka, 10 to 15, so I'll choose 15.
Okay, do we need a motion and a vote on this?
Yes.
Okay. I'll make a motion that we ask our city attorney to prepare an ordinance that would allow our city manager to transfer within a department or between departments up to and including $15,000.
I'll second that.
Roll call vote, please.
Vice Mayor Kostka.
Yes.
Commissioner George.
Yes.
Commissioner Samora.
Yes.
Commissioner Romrell.
Yes.
Mayor England.
Yes.
Motion passes unanimously.
So I believe we now have completed our agenda items. And thank you, everyone, especially for those on the phone, your patience in this process. I think it's worked pretty well tonight.
I agree with that. I haven't heard any dogs or kids or anything.
So with that, I will adjourn our meeting and we will have another meeting on Monday night.
Thank you, Max.
I was just going to ask about that. What do we do about